Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 24th, 2023 Board of Education special meeting. Call to order. With me this evening is Mrs. Rotelli, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Guernsey, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Kelly, and myself, Jen Jacobson, our superintendent, Mr. Testani. If you could all rise. And Mrs. Rotelli, can you start us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, first item on our agenda, public comment. Anyone can come forward, and please just hold the button, state your name and address for the record, and it's up to 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Jennifer Barahona, 74 Cardinal Street. I'm here this evening to address a question that was recently posed to me. Where are the McKinley parents, and why haven't we heard from them on redistricting? This is the first year since 2013 that I have not had a child at McKinley, but I'm here to share my thoughts on this question and on redistricting in general. And for the record, a separate meeting was held on the beginning of January with McKinley parents, specifically with the superintendent, on the same night as one of the forums. So where are the McKinley families? Some are home cooking after a busy day. Others are at work. Some don't have anyone to watch their children in order to attend. Some aren't here because this meeting is only offered in English. Some feel like schools in this community are being pitted against one another and don't want to contribute to who can shout the loudest or plant the most lawn signs. Others are choosing instead to do the only thing they feel they can control, being home to read a story and tuck their children in bed. But my guess is most are home because the information and number of meetings on this issue is frankly overwhelming. They are exhausted, they are frustrated, and frankly, they're burned out after showing up for 20 years on the same issue. And they're being in the tug-of-war game across this community. I'm sorry I'm emotional. I was a parent there for 9 years. What more can be said that hasn't been said 1,000 times by hundreds of parents from this community? When I was on the PTA at McKinley, we organized. We wrote letters. We went to Hartford. We had the BOE, state BOE, come to McKinley. We produced a beautiful video about our beloved community. If you haven't seen it, please go look for it. How many more times are we going to ask parents to show up? You have more than enough evidence over the years, letters of testimonials, and how special our community is and what they want. I also recognize that you have an impossible job, one that has been kicked down the road, and like musical chairs, it stopped with you in your seats. I believe you will do the best with all the information you have, and it's a task envied by none. It's in a role I previously worked in with a superintendent in an incredibly difficult environment. He once said to me, if I make everyone equally unhappy on any given day, I'm doing okay. I'm reminded of that situation now. So I encourage you to continue to look at scenarios that do the least harm, preserve neighborhood and walkable schools to every extent possible, and be particularly sensitive to the needs of the McKinley community who will be disproportionately impacted by any decisions that are made. My message is also to the larger Fairfield community. We all love our children, we all love our schools, and change is really hard. Redistricting is painful, no matter what and when it gets done. But I say this as a lifelong social worker. Our children are resilient, and be assured they follow our lead. There will be disappointment, there will be hurt, but we must approach this as a whole community mentality and stop calling out specific groups in schools. Those optics are painful, and for those who are targeted. I hope we can come together to make the best of the situation that no one wants and show our children how we overcome and support one another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caitlin Helgevold, 82 Coral Drive. Thank you for wrestling with this difficult yet important issue so transparently. Really do appreciate it. Tonight, I would like to put a point on feedback that you've heard different variations of. please do not close down any elementary school in the name of antiquated racial imbalance laws that you all cannot personally stand behind, in the name of space utilization, unless you have data that accounts for the population growth over the next 5 to 10 years. The town has spoken, Dwight has spoken, McKinley has spoken with the support of their lawyer, and at this point, I think it's safe to assume you've received more emails and public comments from the Jennings communities than there are students. The town has spoken, and they'll be watching how the board weighs their voices. The last scenario in which you're considering closing down schools for is in the name of expanding the ECC program by doubling the number of classrooms. And to clarify, this is not to expand the total number of kids, my understanding, that will be in the program, but to upgrade the ratios, which we're waiting on data to support. Now, I trust no one other than Mr. Mancusi and the ECC program to know exactly what these kids need. And I'll remind you, I have a child that I hope gets into the program and under his care. That said, to make the right decision on behalf of this town, you must make the full cost of expanding the ECC program transparent and embedded in your decision making. And what I mean by that is when you ask consultants to, quote, consider the impact of ECC programming, including exploring a one-site location, you have a large hidden cost there. You're assuming the cost of upheavaling lives are by and large free on kids that just went through an unprecedented pandemic. Now, naturally, this is hard to price, so I offer a suggestion. Instead of deciding which is more important, ECC having a single site or closing down an elementary school community, price in the cost of, say, repurposing a Giant Steps or some other facility that exists for the ECC program if that's what they need. That makes the price tangible and transparent in this decision. And if you were to ask me personally, I would strongly advise we invest in the ECC program. To what extent and for what things, I'll leave that to you and the experts. But the critical point here is, if you want to consider closing down an elementary school, an entire community, the bar should be high, and the price for doing so should be transparent and clear to make the best possible decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda. Approval of the 2023 Board of Education charge to consultant. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the 2023 Board of Education charge to the consultant as amended on January 10th, 2023. Can I get a motion, please? Mr. Asa, seconded by Mr. Peterson. In your backup, you have the red line version from the amendment that we made on January 10th and a clean read of that. We did receive, I'll open up to the floor, but we do have a couple of amendments, so unless anyone wants to say anything before we get, go ahead, Mr. Peterson. Sorry. I saw your hand. Did you want to go?
I was going to make my amendment.
Okay.
I would like to amend the revised draft of the 2023 Board of Education charge to consultant as amended on January 10th, 2023 by deleting the words redistricting guiding principles and from the first bullet of the guidance section, as well as adding a new fifth bullet to that section reading, it is preferable that students living within the board's walking distance guidelines be districted as walkers.
You seconding? Mrs. Guernsey, second. Discussion?
Just to clarify, I forwarded copies of this to all of you. I was trying to find the right wording that would kind of allow us to move past those 2015 guiding principles that I feel were outdated in many aspects, but still retain some important reference to walkers in this portion of the document.
I'm just going to ask a clarifying question, Mr. Peterson. Is it going above the provide number of walkers or below? So just the fifth you want to put it, if you're saying a new fifth, it goes above the provide, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Under my scheme, I believe as written, there would be one additional bullet between the proposed plans and provide number of walkers.
Mrs. Vitale?
I want to thank Mr. Peterson for this amendment. I will be supporting it. The board, back in 2019, 2020, we wrestled with the 2015 redistricting principles, and we're in the process of trying to rewrite it. We were at that point facing a timeline of, June 15th, I was to get an update to the state, and our superintendent at the time was leaving. So we switched our focus to just finalizing the charge to, at that point, Malone and McBroom. The Facilities Committee and this board has since taken action on updating our facilities guiding principles, which I think captures a lot of the sentiment that was in the redistricting principles, such as maintaining neighborhood schools, trying to maintain Walker status. So I think that the 2015 redistricting principles were somewhat duplicative. I think that this board, actually, I guess our vote will tell what we think about the walkers, but I support trying to keep those students that are able to walk to school, walking to school for multiple reasons. All of the benefits that were shared during public comment, as well as some of the transportation challenges we've been facing the last few months. I think that adding buses is something that we should try to avoid if we can. So thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Mrs. Kelly?
Hi, I had responded separately to Mr. Peterson on this, that I appreciate this, and I certainly don't want to hold up this process any longer than we have to, but I am really concerned about I would prefer to put as few handcuffs on this process as possible. I would hope that the public would trust that if a scenario came back to us where every single walker was now a busser, that they would know that that was a non-starter, and I refuse to believe that that is a scenario that would get returned to us. So I support the sentiment of the motion, but I would just rather us cleanly send it with as few restrictions as possible. So I'm going to have to feel out the vote on this one because I don't want to be the thing that holds it up, but I also would rather it go as clean as possible.
Mrs. Guernsey?
Thank you to Mr. Peterson for this amendment. It's appreciated. I think I've been clear that I wish we could go back in time and have more time to discuss guidelines and all that. So with that being said, I'm happy to include the walkers because of the term it is preferable. So, we're giving that option. We're being flexible, and we're still giving a nod to to our community that, clearly this is important too. So thank you. I'll be supporting it.
I have a clarifying question. The wording, it is preferable that students living within the board's walking distance guidelines be districted as walkers. Wouldn't that be already the case because they wouldn't be eligible for transportation?
My general thought in this is to, again, create a framework under which the planners would look at people who are within those radii from a school and use that to guide their planning.
Okay, because anyone within our walking things wouldn't be eligible for a bus anyway unless they were one of those exceptions.
That's correct. But as we've mentioned in previous discussions, it is theoretically possible for someone to be a walker to two schools, or to be.
They still wouldn't get a bus.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, all right. Anyone else? Mr. Issa?
I appreciate the spirit of Mr. Peterson's motion. I too have mixed feelings about the wording on this, because when you look at, unless someone's amending later on to take the facility guiding principles out, I think this is already covered, where it talks about trying to maintain neighborhood schools and not busing people past, so basically I think it's covered, and I think it's safe to say this can be considered, and no offense to the amendment, some redundancy. Like Ms. Kelly, I'm not going to vote against this because I want this process to move forward. I believe we need to get this document to the consultants and let them do their work. So as I said in the last meeting, the fewer minutia details that we put in here, the better. I don't think anyone, I mean, I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't think anyone on this board is going to want to have the consultants bring back scenarios that have us increasing busing costs when students can stay, if they can stay within walking distance. So again, if there was enough appetite to take that second part of the amendment out, I would support that, but I will support the amendment if needed as written.
Anyone else? All right, we will take it to the public comment on Mr. Peterson's amendment.
Jill Vergara, 271 Old Post Road. I support this amendment. I do think it's important to have some sort of language protecting walkers in this. I would have preferred to have kept the redistricting principles in, but I'm sensing from the board that there's not an appetite to do that. I do think that it was inappropriate to get rid of these principles without having an open discussion at the board table. And enabling the community to help craft new ones. But I think that from public feedback, it's been clear that keeping walkers as walkers is one of the highest priority items on those redistricting principles for 2015.
Hi there, Katie Flynn, 204 Grandview Road. I just have two thoughts on the current amendment. There are two significant things that are addressed in the guidelines that are not reflective in the charge tonight. Number 6, maintain district class sizes. I emailed about this, but I just want to make sure that the public and everyone's aware that currently the district class sizes for McKinley are smaller than the rest of the district. Nowhere in this charge or your plan or at this table have you addressed how these redistricting plans will reflect class sizes for the schools where McKinley students are moved to. Exactly as a public commenter spoke to before, we hear a lot about efficiencies, but none of the nuance of how this is going to be handled. If that's not addressed in the charge, I'm not really sure how you guys are going to address it. And secondly, number 8. Number 8 in 2015 was create the least amount of disruption. If you can tell me that that was justified in 2015, I would love an answer from each and every person how it is not justified now after the experience of the last 3 years. So not seeing those two things is concerning for me as a parent. And like I said, we all want to see this process move along, but we don't want to not see it done well. So thank you.
Good evening. David Krasnoff, 155 Burr Street. I want to reiterate what a lot of people say, that obviously we want this to move along, so hopefully we can get it done quickly. But I do oppose changes to the first part. I don't understand why we were here for 3 months working on the original charges and agreed to 85% with a unanimous vote, and now all of a sudden 85 to 90% shows backup on the charges. I am concerned that you're not giving enough room for overcrowding and for special programs. We all know that the numbers given by SLAM were done during COVID period and were probably lows to our elementary schools, and to not account for the proper headroom, I think is a major mistake. I hope that you revert it back to just 85% or around 85% would be okay, but 85 to 90, I think you could end up with some schools with 102+%. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no one else, then back to the board. All in favor of this amendment? Sorry. In favor, Mrs. Rotelli, Ms. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Guernsey, Ms. Jacobson, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Peterson. Opposed? Mrs. Kelly. Motion passes 8-1. Okay, I will go next. I have an amendment. And I will just read it, and so we can get a second, and then I'm happy to provide some context to it. I move to amend the second bullet point in the guidance section of the revised draft 2023 Board of Education charge to consultant as amended on January 10th, 2023 by inserting the number 23 before classrooms, inserting the number 9 before elementary and ECC complex learning cohorts, inserting the number 3 before early literacy academies, inserting the number 2 before therapeutic learning centers, inserting the number 9 before ECC classrooms in elementary schools, and striking, quote, the repurposing of Jennings, and adding one site before as an ECC scenario. Can I get a second, please? Oh, Mrs. Vitale, thank you. This is to fill in the part of our guidance where we had some blanks here in terms of, as we talked about over several meetings, our specialized programming needs in our district. I want to thank Mr. McCusey and his team for working to put together an idea of what our district needs and what our students' needs are going forward. As you recall, just for the public who may be joining us, right now in our elementary schools, we have a baseline of 14 classrooms that are utilized for special programming across different elementary schools. The request that came back to us was to add an additional 14, which would have put this number at 28. I did want to provide the board at least a place to start this discussion tonight, which is part of the reason why I put in this amendment, but also I did obviously do a lot of math around this. Essentially, between our 10-year enrollment projections, our elementary capacity study that we have, and the specialized programming request, we have to marry those three in a sense, right? And no one has a crystal ball, but when I did that, what I came up with is the request was for 3 additional CLCs. I added 2. Why did I add 2 and not the 3? I went back to our presentation that we had earlier, a little while ago, on our special programming, and noticed that we did have capacity in the current CLCs that we have now, and almost up to a room, but in different areas. So that was just knowing that we have room in the current rooms, knowing that we're adding 2. I felt like that was just where I was landing at this time. There was an ask for an additional early literacy academy. That is in here. We currently have 2. The ask was for 1 more, so there's 3. We currently have 1 TLC. The ask was for 1 more. That is in here. ECC classrooms in elementary schools. We currently have 4 in our elementary schools, all at Stratfield. The ask was for 9 more ECC rooms. And I will admit that the ECC part of this was the hardest, right? It's the hardest to predict. We know we want to grow the room. We know we want to have room to grow the program or offer additional programming that we currently have. The 5 that I've added here more than doubles what we have in our elementary school, but it is not the full ask. Again, I went back to the counts, what we have now, respectful of the fact that we want to grow the room, but also respective of the rest of this charge. And knowing that we're trying to balance elementary schools, we're trying to resolve racial imbalance, and looking at our utilization. And when I got to 28 classrooms, we were inching up in the work that I'd done based on the best information that I had available to me in the out years, inching towards 95%. Again, the consultants can come back and those section numbers that we have would change, right? But the best information that I have going in the out years was to land here to add 5 more instead of the 9. So it really was a balancing act, and all of that we're trying to achieve at multiple things at this time, a balancing act, and it is a majority of the rooms, and it's hard, but that's just where I landed, and that's some of my rationale for it. And knowing that we aren't planning to 100%, so knowing as we phase in, there would still be room should these all be filled and we need more, right? We're not saying no to more. It's just to hold back to the consultant. What are we going to hold back now? Knowing that also does limit them too. So trying to balance all the needs right now in this amendment, but I'm welcome to feedback or questions. Oh, sorry, and the piece on striking repurposing of Jennings is because we took that out in the beginning in the amendment. So just to be, that's just because it was taken out in the front part by Mr. Ace's amendment on the 10th. That's just a cleaning up. Thank you. Questions, feedback, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly.
Just 2 very quick things. One was thank you for the work that you did behind this. I will be supporting it, and thank you especially for that catch of the 1 site. I hadn't noticed that before, and that is important for the consistency of the document, so thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
My general inclination is to support this as well. I do appreciate that we still are going to have flexibility. This is really for the purposes of the planning of the charge. It's not as though we're foreclosing the possibility of using those rooms further on if they're needed. But I am curious if you've gotten any feedback from the superintendent or from Mr. Mancusi on this number.
I have not, but I welcome it now.
Good evening, everyone. Rob Mancusi, Executive Director, Special Education. With the, the flexibility of capacity left in each of the buildings, as you were talking, me and Mrs. Bruno said we can make this work. So thank you for your work on this.
No, thank you. And no, it's exactly as Mr. Peterson said. This is really for the charge and the consultant by now, and it's not a foreclosure on whatever else you might need in the future. Mrs. Vitale.
Thank you for running these numbers. I will be supporting this. The Finance Committee, we talked about potentially looking at our preschool programming and furthering the discussion on whether or not to offer a full-day option and how that might affect the numbers. Over the last few months, we've talked about short-term solutions for the ECC as well as long-term solutions in terms of the ultimate goal, I think, of trying to have it in one site, whether or not that is a existing building that we have or, a goal looking out 10 years to secure another location. So I think that right now, providing more flexibility for the consultants is a good thing. And this, as you said, is a discussion that can be continued. So I will be supporting it.
Mrs. Guernsey?
Yes, thank you so much for this proposal. I think it's really smart, and I'll be supporting it. I love the balance that it presents, and I'm just pleased that anything that we can do to make this process a little bit easier for our consultants to give us back, hopefully, the scenarios that work for our community. So much appreciated.
Mrs. Vitale?
Through you to the superintendent, was there any feedback in terms of conversations with current families about whether or not they would be interested in a full-day option?
Yes, early indications of talking to our 3-year-old families, not guaranteeing them anything, is that the majority of them would prefer a full-day program.
Thank you.
Mrs. Vitale?
Thank you. Thank you for this amendment, Ms. Jacobson, and running those numbers. And I know that we did a lot of work in facilities and with Mr. Mancusi really going over the numbers. Hard to predict where we're going to land when we're planning 10 years out from now. So I think this really does add to what we need currently. And we do have the flexibility in our building still for the program to grow if it doesn't end up in one site. But I think this is a good starting point. So I just appreciate the work. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay, take it to the public. Okay, no one? Back to the board. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously, 9-0. Thank you. Okay, we are back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion on the main motion as amended? No? Okay, I will take it to the public. Back to the main motion as amended. All right, back to the board. All in favor? Pardon me? No. Okay. Mrs. Rotelli, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Guernsey, Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly, Mr. Peterson. All opposed? Mrs. Kelly. Abstentions? 0. Motion passes 81. So with the superintendent, Mr. Testani, I'll work with you to get this cleaned up, and hopefully we can get this to the consultant in short order. Okay? Thank you very much. All right, moving on to our next agenda item, discussion of the superintendent's recommended 2023-24 budget request. First item is discussion of outstanding questions from our last meeting on January 17th, 2023. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Well, first of all, I had no time today once that email came, so I'm trying to get caught up now. So the only questions I have so far are the follow-up for enhancements. And I will just, Mrs. Jacobson, I'm not sure what you want me to do, if you just want to move to the agenda, and then if we have anything left to give us one more shot at it at the end of this discussion, whatever you prefer. But I don't want people sitting here while I quickly flip pages, so I'll just go with what I have so far. So my first question from page 3, I had, so this is on enhancements. So this is A17. In terms of, thank you for the organizational chart that we received yesterday, and also for the memo, which, put in verbiage. I appreciated both. But I was hoping, and I don't need something written for this, but if we could just be clear, because we'd asked for it to be redlined. So can we just have someone speak to what was changed? I understand the new format, but the idea, so in other words, where has there been the change in responsibility?
So currently, the change in responsibility, the elementary principals have shifted back to James. Janine is handling not only the multilingual learners and ELA literacy, but she is also going to have the LAS's, Language Arts Support Specialist, reporting to her. They will still obviously, be part of the school culture, but she will lead the work, especially given the fact that there's a lot of work, as we are all aware of, over the next couple of years with rolling out new curriculum, new resources, and professional development. And proposed then, as you can see, is a K-12 director of STEM, that would handle and also supervise our science and STEAM director. So that's kind of a shift there as well. So they would work collectively, and the math science resource teachers would also fall under the category of the executive director of STEM. Everything else seems to stay pretty much in line with what's currently intact, and how we're currently operating.
Okay, so just a couple of questions just to be clear. So that the program director of ELA for 6 through 12, that is now a title change because that had literacy as part of it, and that has been officially removed and put entirely onto the executive director position?
Well, she works in conjunction with Janine, so I'm not fully aware of all the titles, and there's been some moves and other things. I was provided with a couple of documents. So it could, Program Director, ELA Literacy, 612.
Okay, because
it's not a shift in responsibility. Her responsibilities has remained consistent with what they currently are. And
so why do we have 2 literacy directors of 6 through 12? Because, again, in my reading, and this could be where I need to be corrected, my reading of literacy is very different from ELA. ELA, those are our English teachers.
Correct.
But literacy is the effort, the interdisciplinary effort to work on our reading skills across disciplines, and that's why I want to clarify. And this was some, and through the chair to Mr. Stein, this is something that preceded you. I had been raising this back when we were advertising for this position and asking for clarity on this.
Gotcha. So, yes, so the program director for ELA is working with Janine and supervising the English teachers in middle and high school.
So literacy will fall, again, I'm looking for accountability here.
Yes.
So
Gotcha.
Literacy is swinging over to the executive director position.
Correct.
Excellent. Secondly, we had gotten, and I can't find the language, mixed details, I think, at our last meeting regarding where the accountability and leadership comes for the the ELL teachers. But now that is squarely coming from the executive director.
Correct.
Because last time I believe we'd gotten a couple different positions were going to be in charge of that.
Correct.
Okay. At this point, right now, again, this is where the red line comes in, the program director of STEAM, who's currently above that in our chart? And I'm sorry, I'm only looking at the new one, so I don't have the old one. Like, how is that a change? Because it's obviously a change.
The current position for STEAM reports directly to me this year.
Okay. And so the previous 2 math leadership positions also reported directly to you?
That is accurate.
Okay.
Mrs. Gerber.
Just while we're on the topic of the STEM position, where is that in the budget? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm missing something. I'm not sure what page it's on. I've been looking, and it's probably right in front of me. I just wanted to get some clarity on that.
Program code 2210, improvement of instruction. I apologize. I will find it. Give me one moment. Sorry, I can tell you the program code, but I don't know the summary object. If you just bear with me for one moment.
While Mrs. Laborious works, could I keep going with my questions and then just stop the awkwardness of staring at her? But a few other questions that I had. To Mr. Testani on page 4, A19, just to clarify, I very much respect what you wrote. I have no doubt that you have done that. I just wanted to clarify my question because I'm going to fault myself with the question when I said, is there an answer to this question regarding a request for a report? Based on all of the work that I know our current DEI coordinator did, it's looking for that information. So this is less of a looking forward part, and can we get more on now?
Yes, that information has been requested.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that my question was clear.
Yes.
My last 2 questions were regarding A37 and then A39. So both of these regard requesting numbers, and then we'll see if it happens or not. But for A37, I'll just repeat what I wrote, which is that I appreciate the offset, but I am looking for what the budget number is for the reduction in the IT budget. I'm looking to have that as a dollar amount, so I'll just put that out to whichever staff
Sure.
would need that. And then secondly, just clarification on A39 to Dr. Zavajanzik. I don't know how this works, and if I pursue this, I want to make sure I'm getting it right. In general, if a position is reduced to create a department chair, I'm going to call it a true department chair position where there's a reduced teaching load, does that then remove the stipend? Because you are getting a full FTE salary and not teaching a 1.0, if there's an increase of $149,000 to hire for that teaching loss for that positions, the $32,000 then would no longer need to be paid. Am I correct?
Yes, that is my understanding. It is a bargained stipend at this point as a result of the extra work beyond the teaching duties, but that is my understanding. It would be reduced as a result of the reduced teaching, which would free up however many you have the different pieces there, 0.2, 0.4, or 0.6 of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Through the chair, may I answer the earlier? Okay. Page, I apologize for the delay. Page 23, within, it's called Summary Object Code 105, but it's line 60. So Department 60, Instructional Services Program Directors.
Not according to this chart. According to this chart, that line belongs to the...
An executive director.
Yeah.
It says executive director of STEM, K-12. And
So, can I...
Which chart are you referring to? I'm so sorry. I thought you...
The People Services, Admin People Services Program Directors.
Oh, you're looking for the new, I apologize, the new Executive Director of Elementary? Oh, I'm so sorry.
No. The K-12
I'm sorry, the K-12 STEM.
Yeah, these are the internal titles, so it's not going to match what would be for the office title. So they're called program directors. So those program directors are within that code. Yes, which went. Are you looking for the executive director of STEM? She shook her head. No. Oh, all right. Okay. She was that position was formerly when it was a director in that line, and now it is in the central office line. I apologize. I thought you were talking about the 12. The secondary.
I don't know if, can I make a comment? I don't know if this is what is causing some of the confusion. In our budget book, there were several mentions of a program director of math instruction in 3 different pages. Now, granted, it had 3 different titles. However, it was always a program director of math instruction, either PK-12 or K-12, depending on the page you look at. I don't see that job on this chart anymore, and it seems like there's been a switch to this executive director person, but I'm not sure that executive director position is actually in this budget.
Yes. So I'm sorry. Are you asking about the math, or are you asking about the literacy? Are you? I can give you
no literacy. We're talking about STEM. We're talking, yeah.
Oh, the ED of STEM. Yes. So when we developed the budget at that time, the discussion was to keep the existing position and create the new title. So it hasn't yet been shifted in the budget. At the time we developed the budget,
position in the budget book is this person.
So it is within that line that I just identified, because at the time it was considered that the position that was currently existing was going to get converted to that title, and it wasn't clear that it would be an executive director when we developed the budget. So it is contained within the line I just spoke of, the position. So there are, let me go back to that line, page 23. And I can provide a crosswalk to this in the with the budget account code structure in the backup documents. But yes, there are currently 4 program director positions. That includes this executive director position, which would need to be receive additional funding and an adjustment. There is an additional executive director of elementary literacy I might be getting the title wrong. Yeah, and that's in a different location.
It would be helpful if we could get the program directors, those 4.0 FTE broken out by title.
Sure.
And then also the same for the admin people services, because we're going down to 8.8, and based on the charts and other titles, it seems to me like we might be short. So it would be helpful if by Thursday we could get that clarified.
Sure. Yeah, I did provide that in the backup document at the program code level, but I'll provide the entire structure. You just got it today, but it is linked at the program code level.
Mr. Peterson.
Just a clarifying question that's going to become apparent in 12 months. So if this is going to be an executive director next year, will there be one position removed from Object 105 and moved into 107?
Even sooner than that, like it would happen when you see the board budget.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yes, for next year, but you would see it in the next board budget document.
When we get our next printed version of
Correct,
this.
yes.
Salary adjustment needed here? Because
when we discussed it internally, there was not a salary adjustment needed.
There was not, because of, if there is, it's very minor if there needs to be, but we don't believe there will be.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Peterson.
Just on this question is for you. On a operational standpoint, do we need to amend it? If it's just going to be shifted, does one of us need to make a motion to amend it?
Well, not now, but on Thursday.
Right.
I think we need to get clarity on this chart.
Will do.
I guess I wanted to be clear that our chief finance officer is not making changes to the budget that are not reflective of votes that we take here at this table.
Correct, yes. Correct. And we have a running sheet of 3 items that require adjustments that we'll share with the board, and that would all be voted on. Number 1 is, you pointed out Sherman. We'll get to that, but there's an adjustment in the utility budget for Sherman. Number 2, there's an adjustment for security need. And then number 3 would be this salary adjustment or position adjustment for the executive director position.
Mr. Issa.
So just to clarify, in years past when we do the budget and we come to the vote night, generally the superintendent provides a document with recommended updates or changes. Board members can have their own, but generally so this will be included in that.
That's correct, and we'll have that too in advance of the meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we can get more into this when we get to the salary section, but does that mean there is no more program director of math instruction that's in this budget book?
The title is Executive Director of STEM K-12.
Okay. Anyone else? Mrs. Guernsey. We're on 117 questions. Do you have any follow-ups from 117? Yep. Yeah, so it's a follow-up. Okay. Yeah, of course.
So thank you for this chart, and it was not my question. Thank you, Mrs. Rotelli, for asking the question. And, as this sat in front of me, when we sat down at the start of the meeting.
Sorry, Ms. Guernsey, can you reference what you're talking about? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's this document for A21. It's a supplementary piece that was sitting in front of us at the beginning of the meeting. It has like orange across the top. So in this document, in the 4th column, it talks about students that are receiving counseling, individual or group counseling, 2022, 2023 to date. And what was sort of shocking to me is at the middle school level at Fairfield Woods, approximately 31% of the students are receiving counseling. At Tomlinson, it's about 33%. These are my calculations, just sitting here. And then at Roger Ludlow, a little lower, 23%. The high schools are in the teens. But those numbers were shocking to me. I don't know how this compares to past years, but just in terms of being a percentage of the student body. So I guess my question is, how are we addressing these needs in the budget?
I can answer that question. This is a hard copy of the link that was in in your questions, this is question 821. I saw Mrs. Rotelli before the meeting, and she hadn't seen it, so I gave her a hard copy. That's why everybody got this. So where we are addressing in the budget your concerns with student mental health, social, emotional, behavioral needs, and our ability as a district to meet those needs. We added the 2 additional school psychologists to primarily assist with an overflow of evaluations. We did say that Woods has reached out to me personally for additional support in that area. Right now, we're looking at this as a multi-year effort. This year, well, last year, as I stated before, we completed our SEL needs assessment. We began implementing year 1 of that SEL plan to build staff capacity to meet the social emotional learning needs and the social emotional behavioral needs of our students from the classroom teacher all the way through special ed. So we believe we're beginning to address those needs, not only with the 2 additional school psychologists, but with the selection of teacher leaders now in each of our schools to support SEL programming so we can build teacher and student capacity in those areas at the tier 1 level before and all through special ed.
So just to follow up then, for that kind of programming that you would provide, are there additional costs that should be included in the budget for the programs that you're providing? I mean, I don't know how that's
in
built
terms
in.
of, SEL support, of professional development support, or, supplies, we do use grant funds for that, and we do have some money in supplies for that.
Okay, thank you. And my concern is really about, these students in middle school that are, again, it's about a third of the students are receiving, again, this counseling, individual or group counseling. They're going to be going up to our high schools. So it's not like this is the end for them, and just making sure we're providing that. Thank you.
I have a follow-up, if I may. Line A11, the well-being as it pertains to budget as well. The program director of student well-being and student support. That is also a program director position, but it is not counted in that same area under that FTE because right now it's sitting in ARP.
So yes, that director position is funded, proposed to be funded in the ARP funding, ESSER ARP funding. Correct.
And that will last how long?
Through next year, so through end of next year.
So it's a 1-year grant-funded student well-being position.
Yes, that's correct. It would be for 1 year, and then it would be a need to support that in the board budget in year 24-25, correct.
Currently, there is a teacher on special assignment that is being funded through the operating budget. That this is a small increase from that person's current salary and benefits. So the increase is minor. It's just a transformation from a non-administrative position to an administrative position.
And the thought that this was a priority and to continue to build out, have a leader in that position to be able to build out the SEL work that will happen in a multi-year way. So it's phasing it in.
Mrs. Vitale.
Just to follow up to that, this board has been very careful about building cliffs. So if we believe in this position and we see it lasting into the future, I would ask administration to maybe consider if we could bring the position fully into the operating budget. And if there's anything that's currently in the operating budget that's maybe a one and done, maybe that would be more appropriate to move into the grant.
We could do that.
That was going to be one of my amendments, so I'm going to let you do that work.
Or me too.
I just want to add to Mr. Mancusi's point that to address the social emotional needs, this is going to be a long-term commitment of the district. I don't think, this is going to build upon work that's going to take several years. And and continue to adjust and to grow programming. But I think to his point, this really has to start from the classroom teacher all the way on up. Cafeteria workers, clerical staff. I mean, we want to create an environment throughout the district that supports social emotional growth and learning of students. And I believe, we've taken some initial steps, and I think we got a lot of work ahead of us. But we do have people in the right places, I think, that will help grow the program to where it needs to be.
Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly?
Just as a follow-up to that, when did Director of Student Wellbeing come into existence? No, my point being what Mr. Testani just said is that it's already a current position. It's not a new position. I've never heard of this position such that I asked for a description of it, and yet it's something that we already have, and I've never heard of it.
Currently, we have a teacher leader of school psychology and school social worker is the official title. It's a teacher level position, but the official title is teacher leader of school psychology and school social workers. That is for the current school year. That is being converted into the proposed position.
And when was that created? No, you're saying there's already someone in 22, 23 doing this job. That means it was not created in this budget. We already have someone doing it. And I want to know when that teacher position was created.
That teacher leader position was created before I arrived, so it's at least 6 years old.
Okay. So, sorry?
It would be in here somewhere. We should be able to point to that current position somewhere in this budget.
As being a reduction, because it's being...
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I can provide with the backup with all the staffing changes, if you'd like, before the meeting on Thursday. Yeah.
So is that director position something that should be in this chart?
It is. Are you asking me if it's in the budget? It is. It's in program code 2140.
No, in the chart.
It is on the bottom, Jen. PD of student support, is that the position? Yes.
Okay, well, but again, then it's not the same title. The budget book has student well-being, director of student well-being. And it's very hard to follow these things when the titles are called several different things, math being the most egregious.
I think one of the challenges was we were asked to produce the organizational chart in a day ago, so we will make sure that it aligns with all of the correct titles before Thursday. So,
Mr. Asa.
I also think it's safe to say and should be pointed out that the administration is in the midst of making some of these changes. And I think that this organizational chart as it is now was presented, but I would think over the next year that there may be further changes or down the road to it. I mean, we're 2 months into a new superintendent here, so I appreciate getting this.
Okay, I did ask for it last Tuesday. So I'm sorry that staff had one day to work for it, but I asked for it last Tuesday, and I asked for it redlined, and we didn't get it till yesterday, and it's not redlined, and these titles don't match up with what's in the budget book.
And I understand that, but I think what's important, and that what I think is being asked, is that we're making sure that these things are budgeted for and accounted for. So if that is through a crosswalk or whatever it is, then that's what I will be looking for. Making sure that they hang up, knowing that some of these things are still in the midst of being developed.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think part of my concern with this, is just that, we're voting on a budget, we're voting on positions in the budget, and I just want to make sure that we all know what we're voting on. That said, as well, on a less selfish perspective, Mr. Testani and Mrs. Jacobson and perhaps Mr. Peterson or Mr. Acer are going to be going to other town bodies to explain and defend this budget, and I'm sure they will ask questions as well. So I just think it's important for us to all understand what we're voting on, what we're approving, so that if people ask us a question, what about this position, that we can explain what it is. So I just think I'd rather have us have these discussions here at this table, at this board now, so that we're not having these discussions at the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM.
If you don't mind, I'd love to just take a moment to make a photocopy of a document that has all of the positions outlined that I can pass out so that you can begin to review the information tonight, and then I can respond appropriately to the follow-up questions for Thursday. So I'll be right back. I'm just going to make a quick copy.
Okay. Anything left from 117? Oh, sorry. Hi, Mrs. Rotelli.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to my question, A21, that Ms. Guernsey brought up. And I want to thank Mr. Mancusi and his team for getting the data. I know it's not easy. And honestly, it's going to be really quick because given that we just got this minutes before the meeting, I want to go into a more deep dive on the numbers, but I'll submit my questions to you tomorrow. Taking a quick look at things, though, can you just explain to me the student under students receiving counseling individual group, are those students with a 504 and IEP?
Primarily, yes.
Are there students in the counseling center who receive counseling who do not have a 504 or an IEP?
Yes, but primarily the majority of these numbers are 504 and special ed students.
So I was going to say, how do we capture the students who are coming in to access the counseling center who are not in, do not have a 504 or an IEP?
We can go back to my team
Yeah.
to see if they can get a flavor of that. We may not be able to come up with hard numbers like this,
Because
but
those centers are open to all the students.
Yes.
And I think my point in the last meeting when I was giving the percentages brought up at the Board of Health with a 264% increase in mental health visits to the school nurse at our high schools alone. I know all those students aren't just identified students. And I very much appreciate the addition to the budget with the two school psychologists to help with the evaluations. I know it's a long-term plan, and I really appreciate the sentiment of trying to create a community, a school community, where these kids feel safe. My concern is that we have crisis-level mental health issues, and I feel as though we should be front-loading this a little bit more to be more proactive versus reactive. So when I'm going to look at these numbers and get an idea of the caseloads, I'm assuming we would take the school social work psych counselor numbers and sort of divide out the students receiving the counseling and get a roundabout number of caseloads. But I'm also not sure, so are the roles for social worker, counselors, and psychs different? Like, do some of them just end up seeing, like, are the school psychologists doing different counseling work than the social workers, than the guidance counselors? Are they doing more evaluations?
the psychologists, obviously, yes, and that's a primary responsibility of their job is to complete psychoeducational evaluations. Social workers complete psychosocial histories. They get the bulk of counseling service or formal counseling services, although at the middle school, particularly at Woods, there is a high level of formal counseling caseloads for the school counselors.
Yeah, I can see the numbers at Woods. Okay, I'm going to do some more in-depth sort of looking at these numbers on my own time, but it would be very interesting to me if we could try to get a picture of how much traffic our guidance centers are seeing from non-identified students requesting help on a regular basis or even a one-off basis. Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up to that?
Yes.
Just, Ms. Rotelli shared this information that was reported at the Board of Health meeting. Through you to the superintendent, would it be possible just to get any more information about those, how the nurse determines it's a mental health call to the nurse? Is it the same number of kids? I mean, we have visits. How many children equate with those visits? Just a little more color if Ms. Mitchell could provide that. And don't need it for Thursday, but as you said, this is a long process, and the more data we get on this and the mental health needs of our students, I think the better.
Anyone else?
Just one quick question on process, because Ms. Rotelli just said something which I think could happen with a lot of us, is that if we have any additional questions, at this point, should we do it as with obviously no reply all, but as a CC to the full board so we all see what additional, because we don't have a doc anymore, and this way we can all see the questions being asked?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I will say, in response to the number of school counselors at the high school, we are well below the national average per caseload. But that is school counselor ratio at the high school level. We are well below the national average.
Now's the time for
But
more.
are we below the recommended ratio from the National School Counselors
9 school
Association?
counselors to 1,500 students is about 170 kids per counselor. That's a pretty good caseload.
That's a good caseload.
As a former school counselor, I would have loved to have a caseload of 170 students.
Me too. I'm going to save this sheet, if everyone doesn't mind, until we actually get to the salary section of the budget book, so we can kind of get into the meat of that, unless there's any objection. Anyone else on 117? Okay. We are going to go on to the contracted services, pages 49 to 53. While everyone looks, I'd like to get an update just on our crossing guards here. Oh, you guys are squishing. They were with the town. They came to us. We were going to contract out. Then we didn't. Now we are. So if we could just get clarity on the crossing guards.
That is correct. So they were with town. They came over to us. We went out for an RFP for it, and they came in a lot higher than expected. So we reevaluated, and we determined keeping them in-house would be the best way to move forwards with them. So they are in-house with us at this point.
So then it's just a move from contracted services in the current year into personnel going forward, into
Correct.
staff area. Okay.
I have a question.
Sorry, Mrs. Vitale?
This is from Mr. Papa George. The walkie-talkies, a few years ago, wasn't the town, we were upgrading radio systems, walkie-talkies. I thought that that was going to be covered by the town. Are these the same walkie-talkies that are now hitting our budget?
They've always been in our budget. It's always either been possibly to support the upgrade to the new digital walkie-talkies or to continue the maintenance of our current walkie-talkies. So it's always been in there. The town is still working with getting through the weeds of figuring out the best way to move with the walkie-talkie upgrade.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maxon-Kinley.
Just thank you for the information, which I know I put in 2 places, and I think Mrs. Jacobson put in there as well regarding the rentals for the rinks. And I got really optimistic when I read that answer about SHU being very interested in working with us, and then I saw the price tag that was included in an answer, which horrified me at being double what Wonderland is charging us. So I was wondering, at what point will we have any information on that? And I'm sure some of it involves relationship building, and I am all for relationship building on this one, but I was wondering where that stands.
So I have a meeting tomorrow morning with my good friend Charlie Dowd. So we'll see where it goes.
So kind of a no promises sort of.
I think we're going to get to a place that's going to meet our needs financially, but also provide us with an obvious upgrade to our facilities usage. So,
Because right now, if I recall, now I can't find the page, it was Wonderland about 350,000 and SHU quoting us at the moment 650 to 700,000.
yeah, I don't know where that quote, how that was.
I think, to be clear, I think it's 340 an hour and 600 to 700 an hour.
I said I caught it very quickly. So
Just to clarify.
Thank you. So let's strip those zeros off. All I remembered was double. So thank you. Don't mind being corrected ever. But regardless, it's double hourly rate, and there's wiggle room?
There's always wiggle room. I did not get that quote personally. I don't know where that number.
Zakia Parrish, Deputy Superintendent. So our athletic directors attended a town planning and zoning meeting, and at that meeting, there was some initial discussion about use of the facility, given the town being able to have priority in use, and that was the initial number that was tossed out, but there was nothing actually formally quoted, but that was what was initially provided, and that information can be found in the minutes of that meeting.
So that was in a conversation between SHU officials and the TP&Z commissioners?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
I would say we probably want to keep that number in the budget because if we have two teams, it's going to be double the hourly usage that we currently have at Wonderland Device. So that number is probably an accurate number to at least have it in the budget for two hockey teams.
Oh, I wasn't looking to make any amendments for that. It was simply looking to bring it closer to home if possible. But so just to be clear, this number covers the ice time needed for all of our teams, but it would be currently at Wonderland with the current arrangement we have there.
Correct. So that's why it's because if we're going to go to two teams, we're going to need double the ice time that we currently have.
Right. No, I'm not arguing that at all. Just thank you so much.
Okay. Anything else on contracted services? No? All right. Let's go to revenue. It's 122 to 135. Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you. Question E7, talking about Title I reimbursement. I just want to clarify, you mentioned in your answer, we're right on the cusp of a higher allocation. So we're talking about the percentage of free reduced lunch students, and we're currently at a lower funding tier based on that number?
Correct. So in the previous funding year, we did go over that amount, which is what resulted in the $600,000 allocation from the state. But this current fiscal year, 23, we did go back below to where we were in previous years. So because we're right there, it's hard to really predict, sure. But we're trying to base it on what we've seen over the last few years, which has been around $300,000 per year.
What's the index point for that? Is that like October 1 enrollment, or is that something that they evaluate later in the year? Or
it's based on October 1.
So we know right now what our number is for this year.
We know what our enrollment is, but we do not know what our allocation for. We know what it is for fiscal year 23. We do not have that information for 24.
No, and I understand that, but it's October 1 enrollment issue.
Correct.
Going on, my question E9. About outside SPED revenue. I'm a little confused by the answer. You tried to jam a lot of stuff into the answer, which I appreciate, and that's fine. I don't think you actually answered the question that I had, which was, you're talking about, you said SPED revenue from other districts have been falling short of our budgeted revenue. Why is that the case? Is it a mix of students? Is it less need? I mean, I guess my issue with this line was if they're open choice students, we know the bulk of the population. They've been with us for years. We should have a pretty good handle on what they're.
Yeah, the open choice is a separate line. I think that the response got cut off. It should be expanded in the printed document, but open choice, we do have predictability, and it's $3,000 reimbursement per open choice.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're talking about special ed.
Yeah.
Special ed revenue from other districts, which in the description is listed as Fairfield will bill Bridgeport for the costs of all special education services provided to open choice students above the $3,000 tuition allocation provided by the state. That's what I'm looking at right now.
I'm sorry, you're looking at the response to the question or the description in the revenue budget book?
I'm looking at, on page 128, under other sources, special education revenue from other districts.
Yes, that's not open choice, yeah.
How is that not open choice if that's, why
So
are we billing Bridgeport for?
So the way that it's categorized, so open choice, I'm sorry, is on page 127, and it's above?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the reimbursement that we get from the state for open choice, but it appears that in the description on page 126 of the budget, or I'm sorry, page 125 of the budget, the last item on the bottom, special education revenue from other districts, says Fairfield will bill Bridgeport for the cost of special education services provided to open choice students over the $3,000 tuition allocation provided by the state. That's kind of what I was getting at here, because I wanted to have a little more clarity on this line, because again, this is an issue in 22-23. We budgeted $167,000 for it. This year we're only we're only projecting to receive $81,000, but yet we are projecting to receive $167,000 for next year.
So you're right, I'm sorry. This is so open choice, we bill. Okay, I understand what you're saying. This is the extra cost for the kids above and beyond. Yeah, and then Rob, could you help with why it's lower than budgeted?
Yeah, and I'm going to get clarification for you for Thursday, but we often have kids from other districts besides Bridgeport that are out-of-town kids that might be placed in foster care here with an IEP, and then we can build back the Nexus district. So in terms of why the numbers look like they do right now in the budget book, I'm going to get back to you on Thursday with those.
All right, again, because the heart of my question is this is generally a population. We're not rotating through 100 different kids each year. These are kids who have been with us for years. So we should have a pretty good grip on what their needs are. I guess I'm surprised that this number for this year is coming in at $81,000, but yet we're just kind of copying and pasting the 22-23 revenue amount.
Yeah, it's not just open choice kids, and we should update that budget number and we should also update the description. So it's not just open choice kids, and that's why you see some up and down.
All right, I guess for Thursday, if you could give a little more detail about that, because I'm a little disturbed that the description in the book is not match what is reflected in the line.
We'll get a breakdown of open choice kids versus other out-of-town kids.
Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly?
Thank you. For question E17 that I submitted, can we have any description, because I'm a little bit unclear from the response, because we've been wondering for 2 years, are we getting bang for the buck? Is this summer boost program going to continue? What's going to happen, since it was entirely funded by grant money? So in reading the answer, for those students who are qualifying for ESY, well, obviously that's not a debatable point. That's not a debatable point. My question is regarding the 100 general ed peers. What exactly is the program that we are offering there? And is it self-sustained? I mean, is it a pay for itself, even though it's only 1/4 of the students who are expected to be participating?
Yeah.
Good evening, Janine Goss, Director of Elementary Ed and Pre-K through 12 Literacy. So we plan to support approximately 100 students in general education, as the description here says. We are in the very beginning stages to see what we're able to offer. We would love to offer literacy support as well as math support during this time, and we really would like to work with our ESY peers to create a summer program that meets the needs of all students.
So structurally, how, I mean, like before we had its own administrator who was in charge, who had the staff come in, all project-based. I guess I'm just unclear on what exactly this is looking like. And again, are we charging these general ed students?
We're not charging the general ed students, and Courtney can speak to where that might be in the budget. We talked about that today, actually.
Yeah, so there's $60,000 in the budget for summer school, and in the past, it was funded through grant revenue. So the last time it was fully self-sustaining was in 18-19, also 19-20. The board supported a portion, so there were 3 programs: credit recovery, general summer school, and then Safety Town. COVID disrupted that, and then Boost came in, and I do have a history in one of the answers that you can look to for additional information on
Very
the
long
dollars.
answer, yes.
Yeah.
Haven't quite made my way through it just yet.
But yes, essentially just to say, yes, it used to be supported with fees, and this year the decision was to provide it to students that are interested in the program without a fee, and we did put it in the budget. It is proposed, it's in there for $60,000. In addition, the ESY program, credit recovery is considered to be revenue generating, so that's in the budget as a revenue item.
How is that revenue generating?
We charge the students that
That's as well.
participate.
Okay. So, and I'm sorry if I missed this, if you said it, so that 60,000 is for the 400, or that 60,000 is for the 100?
The 100.
And is it going to look the same as the Summer Boost program, or is it, because I know we had mixed reactions to its organization, not from the board, from the participants?
I did take a look at the data. That's why I want to wait until we see our STAR data so that we can look at what criteria and what the needs are. We are looking to redesign, absolutely. I want it to look a little bit more like a tutoring opportunity with opportunities for small group, really targeted instruction based on students' instructional focus in both the areas of math and literacy. So again, we're at the very, very beginning stages. I'm waiting to see the data because once I see what the needs are, then I want to design the program around that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to ask a couple questions on page 130. Just a couple of things on the grants. The line 101, Title I, teaching staff from 5.60 to 4.60, and then matching it up to this sheet you just handed out. That looks like we're moving an ELL Title I position from Title I to ARP?
Yes, so part of what we had written into the Title I grant when we did receive the $600,000 increase was the bilingual education teacher that is required to support students at McKinley. We were unsuccessful in filling that position, so in lieu, one of the things the state allows you to do is to get a waiver to have a TESOL teacher actually support those students. So that position was covered by the Title I funds. Now that we have, we're resuming our, well, I'll say what we've actually received from the state over the last few years, we need to move that position from the grant, from the Title I grant into the ARP ESSER grant. So that is the plan, to move it, to shift that position from one grant to another.
And we're also hiring 3 new ELL teachers in this budget.
Those are not a part of the grant shift.
No, I understand, but they're part of the BOE operating budget.
Correct.
Are we going to need that bilingual TESOL teacher after 23-24?
It is something that we do constantly have to recruit for. It is part of the requirement for Title I is that we continue to, or not Title I, part of the requirement for having a certain number of students that speak the same language at a particular school. So it is something that we do have to constantly look for in terms of whether or not it would be one of those existing, ELL positions that are written into the board budget, or this particular position would be determined based on the needs of the students. But it is something that we do have to continue to post and search actively for.
Okay, again, it's just one of those concerns about putting staff. I'm just looking. I'm hearing. I'm hearing next year's budget in the back of my mind into limited time durational grants. Title I is recurring. That's not an issue, right? But these things are going to end, and they're going to either have to get absorbed. And I'm just worried about the number that we're looking at this point being put into ARP versus another grant source that we know is recurring, or into the actual operating budget. Sure. Mrs. Vitale, did you have a follow-up? No. Okay. And then the last one, the Part A teachers teaching staff from 0.20 to 1.20. What's that one? Sorry, 101. Title II, Part A teachers, same page, 130, line 101. Teaching staff from 0.20 to 1.20.
That's the LAS that, so in the proposal we have 11 EPFs converting to assistant principals. One of those EPFs, 1.0 position, 0.5 people were funded with this grant. So that position, assistant principal, is not eligible under this grant. So we're proposing to shift the LAS into the grant and the EPF position out in order to convert it to an assistant principal.
And again, we would probably need that position after next year as well.
Yes, this is a continual grant, and we would expect it to continue at that level.
Okay, great. That's all I had. Anyone else? I will say it again. Going to try and help us on the excess cost piece of this revenue. I'm hoping that this gets addressed by the state. It doesn't hurt to keep repeating that request, as the change did not help Fairfield. And I'm hoping that we get that corrected. So, yes, Mrs. Vitale.
Have you received any? I know you attended the legislative breakfast. We attended the CES breakfast back in December, and that was a talking point at that breakfast as well. Any new information, just in terms
Regardless of the amount that anyone does get from this, until it's fully funded and the threshold comes down, it is at least a 40-minute of an hour breakfast every time conversation. So yes.
Thank you.
Moving on. Staff salaries, pages 11 to 40. Mr. Issa.
Yeah, and I apologize. This is not in the Q&A document, and I did not submit this question, so I don't expect answers right now. And this may be something that I, request simply an evaluation of moving forward for future year budgets. But if you go to the budget book on page 35, under staff salaries, part-time employment, I'm seeing at I apologize, page 36, starting with Fairfield Woods and number 30. If you go down, there's Liaison Middle School listed. It's listed under Fairfield Woods. It's listed under Roger Ludlow. And it's listed under Tomlinson. And my simple math comes up to about $120,000 a year. So I would like some clarity on what that is. I know this has been a long-standing thing in the budget, but I'm curious, kind of talking point that Ms. Maxon-Kennelly always says, are we getting our bang for our buck, and what are certain things? So I am curious as to if these positions are still what they were years ago. Are they still needed as the district is transformed? So I would be interested on any information on that. Thank you.
So I can provide some information. One of the positions, the World Language Liaison, was actually funded by the board last year. It was added to the existing liaisons. And the liaisons serve the different departments within each middle school. And so they coordinate a lot of the department meeting time. They also meet with the administrative team after school to talk about, the school improvement plan strategies that they're employing, the SRBI and interventions that are taking place. So they are acting as a part of the leadership team within the school. And so that stipend is to cover the work that they do above and beyond their full-time teaching duties.
And is that something that has become the position, or has that always been that? Because I can't imagine that that's always been, I mean, this has been in there a long time, so I'm just curious, has it evolved to what it is now?
I'm sure that it has. I don't have the historical knowledge, having just joined in 2020, but I do know that just in the time that I've been here, it definitely has evolved in terms of assisting with the continuous improvement within departments, across departments, and having those cross-curricular conversations about continuing to support students as they try to move the district forward. So yes, it has. I would say it definitely has evolved since its inception. But again, I don't know the date by which it was initially approved within the board budget, but I do know that last year we did add, based on the board vote, the world language liaison.
Yeah, okay. And I would just say, as we look at that, I mean, it's not an insignificant amount of money. If we're getting what we're paying for, that's a good thing. But this is just one of many things that, I think we just, Mr. Testani and your team continue to evaluate some of these things as we move forward and make sure that we're utilizing to the best possible way.
Anyone else on staff? Mrs. Kelly.
Sorry, I have my coat on because I don't know who I ticked off in this building, but I'm sitting under. So I'm sorry, whoever that was. So I don't mean to look like I'm running out the door. Wow. Okay. I know. Once again, I'm sorry, I'm always talking about turnover, attrition, all those numbers. If for anybody else's benefit, I had printed this out myself and I had some questions on it, but it was so tiny and I had asked Meg to give me an extra copy of it, and she actually made copies for everyone. So like following along to my questions, she made those copies. So thank you for that. It was the attachment that you had given us with all the detail. And trust me, nobody wants to understand these numbers more than me, so I could stop staring at them. So I apologize that if I'm asking so many questions. I'm on. No. This was an attachment to one of the questions. No, I did not make this. Okay. The staff replacement number of 640,000 that we're using there. Mm-hmm. I need some help understanding that line and all of them across compared to the staff replacement detail certified numbers on the bottom. I'm having a hard time reconciling those numbers. Could you explain that to me just so I can wrap my head around that?
Yeah, and for those that are looking, this is also for the public attached in the link documents, and I don't know the exact reference page, but you will be able to find it in the link documents as well. So this is a history. The top is the budget. So we budget for the staff at 100%. So if your salary is $100, you're budgeted $100, and then we budget a negative attrition amount that then fills offsets for when we have time to hire or we hire people at a lower salary, for example. So what Mrs. Kelly is referring to is in the top under the, I apologize, normally I label them, so next time I show this I will. But in that first column where it says budget, the first gray section, that's sort of a way to break out one big number that's in our budget for what's called staff replacement. So that 1185,365 is made up of all those pieces. So it includes the an assumption about retiree savings, which is $640,000 in this case for this year. In the past, we had lumped together retiree certified and then non-certified. I did break them out because we are seeing a different trend now in both of those groups. So now you're seeing it broken out. So the actual retiree savings that we're assuming in the budget is 640 plus 102. And then below that is staff replacement attrition. That's basically vacancies and time to hire, essentially. So if I give my notice today and it takes a month to fill my position, you know, and it's a 10-month position, that's going to be $10,000 if my salary is $100,000. So we make an assumption about time to hire there. The next line is enrollment hires. So the board has agreed through board policy. I'm going to pause.
Sorry, I want to spare you having to go through all of it. I guess based on what you just said, and I didn't mean to cut you off, and if you feel like you need to keep going, and it will have at it. But if I'm looking at this right then, and I see the staff replacement, and I'm assuming down under the double lines, these are actual numbers, right? And so if I look at the retiree certified numbers, and I understand why you did the averages excluding those 2 COVID years, right? I get that. But we're showing an average in those other years of $800,000 on that line. I'm having a hard time understanding why then in a still post-COVID era we are using 640.
Sure. So where are you seeing the average of 800? I apologize. Oh, you're looking at just the retiree numbers.
Just the retiree. There's the 848 with the excluding the 2 years, and then the 801,706 average. And I'm having a hard time reconciling why we would still be lower than a non-COVID. Am I making sense?
Yes. I think because I'm breaking it out now, the total, you'd have to add those numbers together and then compare it to the attrition when you add the numbers together up top. Let me say this way. When you look at when you look at the surplus over time, right, surplus or need, we've historically, with this assumption, spent anywhere between 99.9, 99.5, 100.5% of our budget. The attrition number, the way that the methodology that they've utilized in the past, if the attrition goes up, the sub number goes above budget. So there's a matching that you have to look at, which is why we've got to look at the bottom line. So for example, if you look at the very bottom where you see the subs, over time, the average sub overage over budget and it fluctuates depending on how we're doing with backfilling our positions, was about $400,000. So if we were to right size that budget, it's just which bucket do you put it in? We could put it in the sub bucket, but you have to consider those numbers together. When you look at the retiree amounts, yes, the average was about 800,000, but there were some big years. So for example, there was a year where it was 340, there was a year where it was 1.2, there was a year it was 800,000. There's some, so for certified I'm referring to, there's some fluctuation. What we found in the analysis that we did when we did a look back is that, you know, there's some level of unpredictability and there's some level of predictability. So when you see that big bump up, it's a superintendent retired, for example, you know, and so you see a big increase in retirements because people, you know, that's a point when people examine what they're doing. So we did do a 10-year regression analysis, and we did that last year. We applied the same methodology this year, and we came up with an assumed number of 19 retirees on the certified side. And we were asked, why didn't we address that higher? Because last year we assumed 19, and we ended up with 40. Well, we looked at the age bands that retired last year outside of the norm, and they're gone. They're not with us anymore. We don't have people of that age band anymore. So when you apply that analysis, like the anomaly, I think, has left us. Like those 2 years of really, really high retirements, people are not in our district anymore at that age. So I do think this is a pretty conservative estimate of what we would expect to see for retirements for the upcoming year. I can't predict, but it was normally people at a certain age range, you know, we apply the regression analysis and say, okay, they'll retire at this rate. But what happened, what threw the model out was the lower age, between 58 and 62. And again, I can't assume that that'll happen again because we don't have the numbers at that age range anymore in our system.
Okay. Okay. I have so many questions, and I'm sorry. I have to go back to my scribbling here. I guess the part that I'm having a hard time is the assumptions we made last year. We budgeted in total staff replacement 1.1. We're basically flat to that this year, and we know we were way off last year. So if I just do basic, calculations between the retiree numbers, now I know you said that people have fallen off, but we're still anticipating 19 retirees. We were only anticipating 19 last year, so I don't understand how the number can be. If we go from the actuals of 1392 is what we had in certified staff replacement for this year, actual. If we compare that to what we're budgeting of the 640, we're assuming that that number is going to improve, if you will, on paper by 45%. And that number seems hard to swallow for me.
So if you look at what was budgeted, for example, this year, we have attrition budget of 1.1 million, and we're projecting 2.5, right? There's a big variance there, and that's what led to our surplus. There's three main components of that variance. The first is $600,000 difference in retiree savings between what was budgeted and what was realized. I can share with you the regression analysis to show that I don't think we can go. I think it's pretty aggressive to assume even the 19. I could be wrong, but with the number of people we have left at the upper age ranges, I don't think we'll have more than 19 in the upcoming year. But I'm happy to share that data. That's a big amount. That's $600,000 of that variance. $400,000 is going to cover subs. That's above the budget. So because of the attrition that's higher, we actually have a decent fill rate on the subs, but that means that we're $400,000 over budget on the substitutes. In addition to that, about $300,000 of it is related to para shortages, and we did shift the funds to the para contract. This budget does attempt to address that. Ideally, we're going to not be at this place next year because the board has asked us to right-size the compensation for the paraeducators, and we're hopeful that those three pieces solve that part of the problem so that we'll be back into the world where we were pre-COVID, which, was with much smaller surpluses in the personnel side and much less attrition and vacancies.
Okay, and sorry, my last question is just, we are averaging for the certified FTE retirees, I guess it's around the $31,000. What's the number that we're using in the budget? Is that in here?
Yeah, it is the number. It's like 30 something. So if you divided that 640 by 19, that gets you the number I was using. It might have been 20 then. Thank you, Jeff. I might have upped it by one because of our finance committee meeting. I have to look back. But it should be closer to 30.
I'm sorry, miscalculated. It's 33,684.
Okay, that's it, because I took this year's and adjusted for collective bargaining. Okay, thank you.
Anyone have anything else on staff? I have. Go ahead, Mrs. McKinley.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't know if it matters to actually look at it. I mean, it's submitted as B79, but one, obviously, again, we've already said if we could please get consistent on the use of the titles. But I guess I'm just looking for some clarity because I assume executive director versus program director come with two different salary ranges, and I know that because when we've moved people from one to the other, we had to do mid-year salary adjustments. And so I guess I'm just, again, I'm not trying to direct the district, but I'm trying to understand why what had been a math leadership position of 2 with additional responsibilities, I don't understand why it's being switched to an executive director position. More to the point, I'm not positive of why the addition of the STEM leadership to that, and I just want to explain my thinking behind that, because to me it's adding a layer of bureaucracy between the science director and the chief academic officer, which is a working relationship right now. And what we've done is create a position that I believe is going to be a lot more difficult to hire for, when what this district truly, truly needs is leadership in math. And I'm not saying we don't have it now, but we certainly don't want to have that drop off. So to have a hiring expectation of math leadership, which is a definite, and the addition of the STEM leadership, having read the description of what this Superman, Superwoman is supposed to be able to have as qualifications, I'm worried that there are an awful lot of people who would be really, really good for math leadership that simply are not going to qualify. And we have a current structure of, we have science leadership, we have supervision of that science leadership. So I guess I don't understand this as an HR staffing decision. I'm not even positive to whom to direct the question, but I am concerned. We need a very good person for this, and I think we've made it exceedingly difficult to fill.
Well, we felt as a team that this would be more appropriate for the titling and the responsibilities of the position. Is math leadership going to be the primary responsibility? Absolutely. But we did feel, because they will be working in conjunction with the math science folks at the elementary school, and also working with Justine, that a STEM in the title would be appropriate. I mean, we could certainly change it to Executive Director of Mathematics and leave the structure in place as well, but we just felt as a group that this was an appropriate title, and that's how we named it.
And again, that's beyond my position as a board member to, that's the staff decision. I'm just going to say, because again, I had a lot of concerns. I raised them, and I kind of wish I had raised them more loudly when we were hiring for Ms. Goss's position, which we knew was impossible when we were advertising for it. And I am extremely grateful that with your leadership that has been adjusted for, so that because they're 2 incredibly important jobs. And so that's my concern with this as well. Again, I appreciate the literacy clarity now of who should be in charge of literacy, and I understand that as an executive director position, because clearly that crosses multiple departments. But that's where I don't understand this not being simply a program director position, focus on math. We have someone who is focused K-12 science, and so that's, it's not my call to make. I'm not supportive of this direction, because I think it muddies waters of, again, accountability, who's answerable to whom, and so I'm voicing that now, because I voiced it only through email when we were doing the other change, and again, I am sure you're open to things, but I would have felt wrong if I didn't say something. I didn't know, Mrs. Jacobson, if you'd want to follow up on that.
I do have a follow-up. In the qualifications, it said this position would have a master's degree in either science or math or curriculum. And then an 029 in secondary math. So I feel a gap in elementary when we have elementary and secondary position now, and we're going to no elementary certification in a leadership position.
There is no elementary math certification. You have to be certified, well, there is some old certifications that go to 8th grade, but there's 7, 12 certifications.
But I mean, in the job description that was posted on the link, there wasn't an elementary component to that, and we do have an elementary focused person now. So I just share the concern. I also am not sure it's actually in the budget, so we're going to get clarification on that. It might need to be a motion to be added, although we'll get to adjustments later, but I do feel like we need to look at some math leadership. possibly?
It is a draft job description that the team put together. It hasn't been posted. Would finalize the posting as it came closer to time, but it is January, so it was just a preliminary job description that was developed. But the primary responsibility is to lead mathematics for the Fairfield Public Schools, and Courtney assures us that it is in the budget.
So if I could just continue, I appreciate the reminder that this is preliminary, which is exactly why I wanted to say something now. I mean, I think we as a board want math leadership, period. You know, the addition, and that's, I agree with Mrs. Jacobson, reading those qualifications didn't necessarily point to getting a math leader, but I accept the point that it is a draft. So I've said my piece, I'll move on. My question, for question B83, this is regarding the teacher resident position, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not sure, Mrs. Vitale, if you remember this better, after the board cut that teacher resident idea from 2 to 1, we did that as a cut, didn't the previous superintendent increase it back to 2 people through the grant? So at this point, is that second person still covered by the grant, and this is for 1 person? And when does that person when do those people graduate?
So that is correct. So we currently have 2 in their first year, and so they'll be rolling over into their second year, and then we have a position for 1 to start in fall of 2023.
What do you mean a position for 1 to start?
Well, in terms of the actual resident. So we have 1 resident that's still budgeted for that will start fall of 2023, just 1.
And the second person?
There isn't a second person for 2023-24.
Okay, let me back up. And again, I'm not faulting you. I want to make sure I'm understanding this. What is the total, this was helping to pay for the master's degree with the idea of we're partnering with you and the hopes that we are now recruiting you to be a staff member in district. How long was the program to get the degree?
The program is 2 years.
So aren't both of them going to be entering their second year?
Yes, the current residents that we have now, they're entering their second year. And then we'll...
So backing up to when we first started the program, we have 1 resident that has completed year 1. She has been placed as a full-time teacher, but she's still considered as a year 2 resident. For the current, so we have 1 year 2 resident, and we have 2 year 1 residents. 1 is grant funded, 1 is board funded. And so at the end of this current school year, then they would be eligible to potentially, move into a classroom position. That's the goal of the program, is to have them.
So that's 3.
That would be 3 people that are on their path to completion of the program. I won't say they've completed it because there is a year 2, there are some year 2 duties for the people that are currently in the first year of their program.
Because obviously it was something that had been a real concern of this board, was the fact that we had no guarantees that this investment was going to result in an actual successful recruitment. So are you telling me we have successfully recruited 1?
Correct. The one that completed year 1 of the program is a full-time teacher now at McKinley.
And we have hopes of recruiting 2 more.
We have 2 that are currently in the pipeline.
And this teacher resident money is for a new recruit?
Correct.
And so then my question would be, not that I'm looking to add, but is there a reason that the decision was made to not go for 2?
I believe that the grant funds were reallocated, but I'm not.
Right, but originally it had been in the operating budget. The board cut 1.
Correct.
The previous superintendent was committed to it and opted to use grant money for it.
Correct.
And so, again, I'm not exactly questioning. I'm just wondering, what was the thinking behind sticking with 1 and not expanding back to 2?
So we are looking at some other possible options that for growing our own beyond the TRP program. Mr. Testani is familiar with some of the other programs throughout the state that have been successful in his previous district, and so we're looking at those opportunities, but didn't want to completely truncate our relationship with the TRP program.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And if you happen to remember, because I'm not positive I will, but if we could have an HR update in June, if we find out that we are successful, I just very, very brief, small feel-good moment of, yes, the recruitment was successful, because we had quite a bit of debate about that point of that panning out.
Just to give you a little background, the first teacher resident program in the state was developed in conjunction with Sacred Heart and myself through the National Teacher Residency Program out in Chicago. That program that we developed and partnered with Sacred Heart was significantly less in cost, and also obligated the resident to work in the district for 5 years. Upon completion, if they did not complete the 5 years, they would have to pay back the university, depending on how many years they did not complete, a prorated amount. So we were not on the hook as a district to have to get a promissory note that was done at the university level. So there are some options that we are exploring to bring a partnership similar here to Fairfield that would obligate the resident to commit to 5 years beyond the completion of the program to stay with us.
And just for clarity, that's obligates them, but what if we aren't interested in their being obligated?
Oh, no, it obligates them upon hire. It doesn't obligate us to hire them. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
No, just wanted to check. All right, the next question on the page, B84, I believe this is my mistake, and then Mr. Mancusi, I may have sucked you into making the mistake. I said Medicare coordinator, and I am assuming that that should have been Medicaid, and therefore that the title is Medicaid and Grants Coordinator. Okay, so again, I own that. I just wanted to make sure that there's not some 65-year-old in a program that we're funding that I was not aware of. Sorry, Mr. Asa. Then on to pay, I think this is still under staff, although I neglected to put page numbers in, so Mr. Jacobson, if I have to be redirected, please tell me. For C23, follow-up to Mrs. Vitale's question, regarding the decision that was made due to the challenges of certification, we are not recommending rolling the reduction to the 2.5 teams to 7 and 8. So does that mean that class sizes at those two middle schools will be going down relatively significantly? And I raise that because, just so you know, my follow-up will be regarding the Tomlinson class sizes. But first, I want to make sure that I'm understanding that we can anticipate, when we see the next budget book, that they're going to have much smaller class sizes.
There will be some reduction. I can't say what it would be in terms of it being qualified as significant, but due to the decline in enrollment, it would naturally result in a reduction.
And my follow-up, and I found it, and now I'm not sure where it is, but I had questioned, and I've questioned this a few times in the past. Every year, the Tomlinson class sizes are larger. Consistently, across the board, across all grades, looking at the averages, they are larger. And while I accept, because teachers make the argument all the time, myself being one of them, that smaller class sizes make a difference, understanding that, and I know I've asked for data and science behind this, I get that, but the idea of the speed of feedback and the one-on-one method of doing interventions has always been to me rather common sense, and we are now setting up a further divide between the school, which has students that we know have a tremendous demonstrated need based on the test scores from that school, having significantly higher class sizes than our other two middle schools with less demonstrated need, and I have a real problem with that. And I'm not saying this with a solution, but I wanted to clarify that this is what is being set up here. And unless there's some magical turnaround in test scores, which is demonstrating what we're doing academically, you cannot convince me that a class size of 25 is having its needs met as well as a class size of 18 or 19. And I would just ask that staff consider that. It's not that I am begrudging the other two middle schools at all, but this contrast is an inequity, and it's becoming a more stark inequity, and I find that very problematic. So I'll just leave that there. Okay, sorry, I had a couple other staff questions. I'm having a hard time following the own document. I'd had a question about paras. I can't find where the page it was on, but I'd asked the question of the lesson we've learned from outright having less staff. And while I acknowledge that I recognize that some of the disparity in terms of the paras, number of paras we're looking to hire for next year, part of that is attributable to the movement of programs, specialized programs which need paras. But we suffered this year for not having them. We as a board are taking steps to have much more aggressive recruitment of them. That said, have we learned anything about efficiencies, that there are some positions that we can do without? Well, again, I'm not arguing for it, but I think it begs the question, and I would just like to hear the answer officially.
Before Rob starts, we have had significant conversations, Rob and I, on how paras will be deployed, how they will be hired, and then, again, how they will be deployed in the future. And I think he's quite satisfied with the request that he made that I completely support. So he can speak a little further.
Yeah, one of the things we did learn, because we had to kind of, we had to, no other choice because we had such shortages, is that, and one of the focuses of the special ed department pre-COVID was, focusing on increasing student independence to the greatest extent possible through the use of instructional dyads and triads and small groups. So we are looking at, paraprofessional to student ratios. Obviously, a lot of this is based on individual needs of the students, but we have, and I think we've done a great job overall, we've had to do more with less, and we've learned that kids have progressed on goals and objectives. So we are looking at, how we do staff and allocate our paras moving forward. I don't know if that answered your question.
It doesn't. It doesn't. First of all, I very much appreciate the analysis that was done, the learning that was done, the acknowledgement of that there. And obviously, I'm not looking exactly to make those advances and make those efficiencies at the cost of an exhausted staff, because it could be, yes, we were able to achieve this, but the ends didn't justify the means. But I'm sure that some of them are simply legitimate efficiencies. So I appreciate that, but I think Mrs. Vitale has a follow-up.
I do have a follow-up. We also have paraeducators who are not supporting students who have IEPs. And to follow up on that, just as we have, hopefully we won't, but dealing with shortages, I would just ask you to look at how we utilize that staffing across our classrooms in our school. To Mrs. Maxacanelli's point about class size, you have a class size of 16, and you have a paraeducator, and then you have a class size of 25, that maybe, where is the support needed? I think that right now we just want to maximize our staff and, put them where they can do the most good for our kids.
Absolutely.
And then I just have one last question, and this is follow-up to D5, because this, I think, is going to be some important information that the board needs. I had raised the issue last time regarding the sub-management tool being cost-neutral, and Mr. Asa has schooled me a bit on this is how budgeting is done, and I can't even repeat the education I received. However, now this appears to be a changing number. And so I am wondering when we will receive, I don't know if everyone had a chance to see the answer to D5. But I was wondering if you could.
We did meet and finally receive final proposals from both vendors. We've taken a harder look at what negotiating tactics and we have available to us. After further glance, we may put this on hold based on the limited flexibility that we would have to negotiate that cost down because of the very slim margins both vendors have in negotiations. But Courtney can fill you in a little bit more.
Yeah, to your point earlier, it is a good program. It is something that I think Fairfield would benefit from, as Mr. Sassani said. So it just warrants further research, and there's a new purchasing director with the town. So we look forward to continuing to explore it. But at this moment, we're removing it from a budget item. And when we are ready to put it forward, we'll put it forward before the board.
So to be clear, in the amendments amendments that are coming from staff, this is going to be the substitute management tool is coming out, and we'll have that as an amendment ready for us by Thursday.
Correct, yeah. It's a cost neutral, but you'll see it come out from one account code and into another, restoring it back to the long-term sub.
I'm not even going to ask you to explain that again. The point being
So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Kelly.
I hate to even ask this, but we have accelerated math, the big elephant in the room, to talk about a dollar amount. The only thing that I saw referenced in here was possible textbooks, I guess, and some materials. But, I mean, there's a potential transportation cost, there's a potential FTE cost, or I don't know if it's a stipend, but do we have a ballpark of a tolerance? Or what can we absorb that I hate that it's a big unknown, and I know we have to move forward. We can't hold a whole budget up because of it, but I think we have to have a realistic expectation of if it's going to cost more than X, then everybody repeats fifth grade math. I don't know what the answer is, but.
We're having a meeting in the coming weeks with all the families. We've invited them to attend. And we're going to try to gather some information so that we can make the best possible decision for the vast majority of the students that are participating at the least amount of impact to the fiscal budget. So I'm with you. We're trying to make this work the best we can with what we've been given. However, I think just trying to get an understanding of, rather than put out a proposal and then hear that it contradicts what families would agree to, if we can, and I know we're not going to get 100% agreement, but if we can satisfy the vast majority and then maybe have a plan B for the others, I think we can come up to to an understanding of what the costs may be in the coming weeks.
But that doesn't help us if we have to vote on it.
Well, I do think we do have some wiggle room, as you can see from the current budget. I'm sure we will have a little bit of wiggle room in next year's that we can allocate some dollars. But I'm quite sure that we'll be able to come up with a comprehensive plan shortly.
I have a follow-up to that. Can someone show me where the math and science, elementary math and science teachers live? That's not the STEAM teachers, right? So where do they live in this budget book?
I apologize. I just need to say the budget book is the only time we live in these categories, so I'm not as familiar with the structure. I did make a suggestion to the Finance Committee that we change the structure for future. So if you just bear with me for one moment, I will find it.
And it can be a follow-up, that's fine. You don't have to answer it right now because I'm collecting the follow-ups, but.
Yeah, I believe they're in 101, the teaching staff. You're asking about math teachers? Math science, would they be called STEAM?
The MSTs.
The MSTs, okay.
Not STEAM.
MSTs, their support
It's fine
staff.
if it needs to be up. I would just like to be directed to where they live.
I would be more than happy to follow up.
Thank you. Okay. And also, can I ask a really quick question? The program director for the ECC, is that in 60 or 62? On page 23, sorry. Again, that can be a follow-up. I just, you know what, Courtney, the follow-up question is going to be to break down that 1662 anyway, so we should figure out who's in those buckets.
Okay, I'm
And
happy.
then the MSTs. It's okay, don't worry. Anyone else have anything on staff? Mrs. Kelly?
I apologize. I can't even, I've lost sense of where I am here. But I had asked you last week about the retirements, the pensions, and if the 401A was increasing, was there an offset coming? And I apologize. The answer could be in here. I just haven't found it. So
Yeah, I did attach the link for the backup for the analysis. It includes the pension amount with the pension assumption and then the 401A, showing the 401A increasing. We did keep the pension number flat in this budget, so when you see it, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to come back to me. It has been declining over time, but because we didn't get the actuarial assessment in time for the budget, which we will get before we meet with the town bodies. They usually do provide it in early February to us. So in other words, yes, there is an offset. You can see it over time. We kept it flat from last year's number on the pension side and slightly increased to the 401A.
do we always keep it flat?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that's a good methodology, but I
Right.
did follow the prior, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I have just a follow-up. For the MSTs for the elementary school, wouldn't that just be part of teaching staff in that total number for each school? They're not broken out separately. It would just be part of that.
Yeah, aren't they certified?
101?
Yeah, I can, and I can, we can verify that. You know that?
Yeah, when you
Teachers dash classroom.
Yeah, well, I mean, right now I'm just looking at page 104, and it breaks it down by elementary school, and 101, teaching staff, that would be included in the total number for the school as just teaching.
Page 104?
Well, I'm starting at, 104. I mean, I'm just, and it might be in other pages in the budget book, but if you look at the breakdown by school, it gives you a number.
It might be. I just wasn't sure where they lived. I wanted to verify where they are, if they were in
No, and I
certified
appreciate that. I
support-
just was
yeah.
really, trying to just maybe help staff refresh some memory, being that we're looking at it from a different
We'll have
lens.
a list of some. Staff? Last call? Anybody? Nope. Okay. Benefits. Last pages 41 to 43. Anyone?
Just for the health insurance. So we're at 10%, the range that we're given anywhere from 9 to 12. So there is some potential exposure there. Has any new information come up in the last few days? Very often it just seems like that info comes right as we're about to deliberate.
Yeah, the state made an effort to get us information earlier, so we did have a meeting last week, and they added another quarter to their actuarial assessment, and it's looking more favorable. So their estimate is 8 to 10%. So our 10% is on the conservative side right now. They'll give us another update in February and the final rates in April as per usual, but they expect that that'll hold true with that additional quarter. In general, the industry is seeing a little bit of more of a normalization at this point in time. I say more because it's not a full normalization, but more than what was originally projected.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to transportation, 55 to 58. Mr. Issa.
Thank you for the answers to my questions. I just have a follow-up on my question B56. So I see how you answered this regarding the increase in sped aids on the bus, accounting for rate changes and adjusted runs, and that it says see attached for detail. B56, page 16 of the questions. In my original question, I had also included in there the question, I phrased it, we are not funding aids on open choice transportation, are we? And I said, I believe CES is responsible for that, correct? And I would just like to hear from that.
That is correct. CES is responsible for the transportation for them.
Okay. But have we had a request for aids for open choice students?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
I know it's on the chart here. I'm going to ask just a clarifying question based on the chart that's on page 56. I know there's been like a lot of questions on the chart and back and forth and whatnot. So can we just confirm the actual number? Are we budgeting for 119 now?
115.
Oh, so you're going with the lower number.
So we were budgeted this current year for 119. As of December, we were running 102 buses. So yes, we budgeted for 115, and we think that's an appropriate number.
I'm just going to follow up because we're running on a shortage now, even though we budgeted the 19 and there's been issues, and aren't we hoping to be back at our normal level? I mean, this is almost like, because it's budgeted now, and I hate to have like a cliff going forward. Like, we're basically saying we don't believe we can get the additional buses, so we're going to cut them, and we're going to continue to run under bust, so to speak.
Not under bus. We feel that the 115 102 is not the right number for us to be running, but we also don't feel that the 119 is what we need to get to as well to be at a comfortable situation. We met with our service provider just this week, and they're in the process of evaluating our route system, but they feel that we are right on target with the 115.
Mrs. Vitale.
So 115 is now our new number, our optimal number moving forward, or is it still 119? I appreciate, we talked about this in Finance Committee, that 115 is probably realistic, given the challenges we've been facing with transportation and finding drivers and our current drivers. Thank you very much, if any are actually listening, for their work this year and the overtime they're providing to us. But I share Ms. Jacobson's concerns just in terms of exposure again. Come the beginning of the school year, I don't want it to be 119 is the right number and the funding not to be available, or at the very least, to be this board to be very transparent and understanding that that's something that might need to be adjusted.
So there is a small risk there, but we are comfortable with the 115. We are currently working with revisiting our staffing at transportation, so that would help bring those numbers more into line. But with the staff that we have and what we've had discussions over these last couple of weeks, the 115 is what we feel is a comfortable number.
Mr. Issa.
Yeah, and just to follow up on this, and to be clear, the 115 is a total number. It is not necessarily the number of big buses. Let's just break it down into layman terms, right? The big buses are not being reduced.
Correct.
By this going from 119 to 115. So that in theory, if we got to the 115, we would be returning to the normal number of large buses that we previously had.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And the industry, when Angelos and I met with our partners, everyone's shifting a little bit towards using the bigger tier or the longer hour buses. So you're not paying as much in excess hours as you would have if you have a shortage, or even just to accommodate your runs or your fluctuations, for example, in the needs of special education students. So with that in mind, that's where the industry is going. Our preliminary assessment is we think that 115 might be the right number, but you're right that the dollar drop isn't the equivalent of saying, well, average 5, I'm dropping 4 buses from my 119. You'll notice that when I show you the comparison of the 119 all-in budget to the 115 budget, it's only about $250, I think, $1,000. And so that difference, we're saying it is a risk, because if we do, as we get closer to enrollment, we see where families are living, because our demographics are changing. As all of that happens and we do this really fine assessment, there is a small risk that we could come back to the board, but it'll be early enough in the new year that we'll be able to make proposals and then speak with the board about how to accommodate that. That said, at this point in time, it does seem like 115 is the right number.
So that potential adjustment that you could come back to us would more be on the SPED side, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So just to be clear, so with the public listening, and that is a concern that I did raise, and I am taking your answer and trusting you on this, I do have the concern on the SPED side. I do feel comfortable on the traditional large bus side for the rest of the school, because in theory, we would be going back to pre-COVID numbers for that general transportation.
Yeah, and one of Mr. Tissane and Mr. Papageorge's goals is to be very responsive to the special ed needs in the upcoming year. So, and I'll be working with them on a finance side to make sure we have what's in place that we need.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on transportation? Okay. Operations and maintenance of buildings, 83 to 92. Mr. Issa.
So I had submitted question B57 on page 16 regarding the tree work. And I see, thank you for the answer, Mr. Papageorge. I'm not necessarily sure that maybe I didn't pose the question properly, because it wasn't the answer I was looking for. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, we've handled tree work in such a way, and I know we've had an absolute increase in the requirements for tree work in our district at our schools, and that there is a difference then when it is on a school property, the town expects us to do the work, correct?
Correct.
The town takes care of all the trees not on school property. They have a crew, they have contracts. My question was getting at, does it make fiscal sense to try and partner with them, and whether that be a cross-funding, from the budget to the town side so they could handle it, or are we better off doing what it sounds like we're doing and going to contract for our own outside companies to come do this tree work? I'm having difficulty not understanding, should we just be giving the town money from our budget and letting them increase their capacity to handle the trees on school property?
It's an interesting theory that we can definitely look into. I know the town...
You could tell me I'm absolutely off base, too. I won't take offense.
Not at all. We can look into it. I know that the town currently has 2 tree cutting, trimming crews that are out on the road almost every day, and they're just so overwhelmed at this point that they can't keep up. So that's why we look and do them in-house most of the time. And I don't want to put any blame on the town at all. Every time we do have an emergency, something falls, there's something dangerous, they respond very quickly and take care of it and help us get to the point where at least we are safe until we can get it taken care of fully.
So another follow-up to this. Can you explain how it works now when we have to do tree work with regard to bidding and town purchasing? And are we able, if we have a situation, are we able to just have somebody that's on contract come out, or do we have to get each job bidded and then approved?
As you know, the $3,000 threshold. So if the job is under $3,000, we get 3 competitive prices for it, and then we go from there. Most of our tree work has not been over that $3,000 threshold, so usually it's a competitive pricing that we get for them. In my time here, we haven't actually, I can't think of any trees that we've cut off the top of my head that were over that $3,000 threshold. But there will be times, and this is why we were looking at, with this particular project, we're going to most likely go out to bid so that will identify, working with the tree warden, we identify the trees that need to be either cut down or trimmed way back. That plus the new ordinance with the state for trees and location next to playgrounds that have to be moved back. So we'll be working on that, and that's where this project came out of.
All right, so there's no way for us just to go out with an RFP for an annual tree service like we do with like a company would do with a snow plowing, and if it snows more, you make out, and if it snows less, the contractor makes out. That is not something that we can do here, so we just have somebody on call when we need it, and they are our go-to.
We have actually talked with the town purchasing department to perform an on-call bid service. It would include trees. It would include some other types of services that we don't currently handle in-house, such as excavating, possibly even fence repair, that type of stuff. So get an on-call service so that, as you said, we have them so we don't have to go out to bid if we get a tree that needs to be done quickly. We have them on call and ready to come out.
Okay, so you say you've begun talks with the town on that, or we talk to them and that's not an option?
We have talked to them with that. We will continue. There's been some changes in the purchasing department, so with those changes, we will reopen those talks.
Okay, and I would appreciate that, because if it can yield us better results, more efficient results at a cost neutral or better, I think it's something that we should hopefully explore. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Peterson?
Hi, thank you. A few things, just on the tree issue. Mr. Popovich, I'm going to lobby again for that tree, the dead tree that's standing right in front of the Ward driveway as you drive in.
To the right. I'm very familiar with that tree.
As you turn into the property, the first thing you see is that dead tree hanging over you.
That is the first one on this project list.
I appreciate hearing that. Thank you. I asked them the questions about, and we've talked about this again and again, about watch wire, about this contract. And I noticed in your answer, and this is for real-time utility monitoring. We've been going back and forth, talked about it in Finance Committee a little bit. And last year, I think you had hoped to have it in place already. And it looks like you're going to give us a full report in February. But I guess if we are, as your answer suggests, going to implement this in February of this year, where is that in the budget?
So we are still in the process. We use part of that to build the budget this year. We feel that we may be able to come back with some changes once this is fully online in February. So we are anticipating those changes possibly coming end of February before we go through the rest of the town bodies.
But after our vote.
Yes, that's why we use part of the information, and then we use our typical past practice of for projections for utilities.
We spoke with Jeff Mayer, the town consultant that works on energy, and because they didn't have all the rates at the time, and it wasn't because the town was delaying. I saw your question. It was just because they were waiting for the optimal time, and they were with a group. It wasn't a consortium, but they put together a group to get pricing per. They secured another 25% block of, for the electricity because we were out of contract. So we got favorable for this market. We spoke with Jeff when we developed the budget before we had those rates, the rates that will be loaded into Watchwire. We waited till we're testing the rates of the past, but we're loading the new rates now that they locked them in about a week ago. But we did speak with Jeff, and we applied an 18%. We took 1 year annualized experience on the electric, and we probably applied an 18% increase to that. On the heat, we took 1 year experience, looked back from October to November, and I believe we applied a 10% adjustment to that. So you see a drop off in the budget because we were a little bit overstated this year in the budget based on the town's rates of the past. That's why we used the actuals this year, and that's why we're looking at Watchwire doing some of the projecting for us. In addition, the water, there were some questions on the water. Again, that was a 1 year look back. There was a big bump up in one area that I believe you asked about.
Well, yeah, and I guess looking at the answer, I don't know why we looked at what appears to be a calendar year versus a fiscal year. I don't know that it would make a difference, but it strikes me as odd that we would do it that way.
Yeah, part of our reason was because, so on the electric, we went out of contract, and on the gas, we went out of contract in January of last year. So we just wanted 1 year's experience, given that, and things changed pretty significantly in the last 2 quarters leading up to this time. So
Right, but that's not true with water.
That's true. That is true. We can do an adjustment and look at a year experience. With water, we only added 5%. It's a small part of the budget, but it's a good point. Yeah. That said, we do expect an increase in the summer again, so we were anticipating that. Unfortunately, we'll continue to see really hot summers.
No, that's fine, and I understand that. Again, I'm hot for accurate real-time data, and
we're really excited about Watchwire.
The degree to which we can get that, I can't stress enough how happy that for years it's the same thing. I won't go into more detail about it. I may have some follow-up questions based on the answers here. On the issue of Walter Fitzgerald, I just want to make sure my timing is right, because we had a full year there last year, but we purchased that property like the 6 months before we went in. So when our budget was completed, assuming that we were going to be in Biro Street for the numbers that are in here for 22, 23 budgeted, correct? You see what I'm saying? All right. I want to make sure that my timing's right, because those shifts seem to be a year out of place, but I'm just compressing it. All right. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
And Angelos is happy. We've already talked about him coming once Watchwire is fully live to not the next finance committee, but the one after that, to present the results. And it's not just a budgeting tool. That'll be a management tool so that all of these things can be looked at and best practices, ideally. And I hope you'll be happy with that in the finance committee, and if not, we'll tweak it. So
I'm very excited. I'm like, I don't believe it's happening at this point, just because it's, it'll be like Christmas when it happens.
Do hope you read
that may be pathetic, but it's true.
But Jeff, I do hope you read the copier amendment, because I did get you a lot of information, and I do think I appreciate you pushing for that, because I do think we're going to recommend that there's savings in the budget that we can take next year that we'll introduce at Thursday's meeting, additional savings.
And I'm sorry, did you link it in here?
I did, yeah.
My previous question? Okay.
And for the public, just briefly, Mr. Peterson did ask for a copier history. We gave information year to date, and then show also the projection for out, so it includes the lease, the cost per print, as well as what our projected cost is for that print management system. We did pilot it starting in October. We hope to roll the rest of it out in March. And if the board approves the transfer, we can prepay or do a perpetual license to do the addition, so we would see a savings next year. We knew it would be cost neutral if we did a lease over multi-years, but I think thinking through what you were asking, I think it'll help us focus on that management tool, and we expect to get about 10% additional savings. That said, it was overstated for many years, but I did want to give credit to my staff for reducing the budget by 9% last year to this year. So we are projecting that we're pretty much on target this year. We're not going to come in with big overage, extra budget this year.
Great, thank you.
Just as a quick follow-up, where is the link? Which question is that?
I don't know, but I can look.
Okay.
Anyone else on maintenance? Oh, Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on the question I'd asked about the Ludlow Middle School and Ludlow High School, the auditorium work. It's question F13. First, just a technical thing that it does say under Roger Ludlow, the Fairfield Ludlow High School auditorium lighting. So that's just a typo that should be changed.
Correct. So there's two projects there, the Fairfield Ludlow High School.
Right, and you say
lighting.
Fairfield Ludlow twice. That's why I just said you should
Correct.
just change it to Roger
Thank
Ludlow.
you.
And then my other question, too, is that I recall from going to productions at Ludlow High School that their sound system had a lot of the same issues that it appears Roger Ludlow has, with the crackling, the noise. I remember being at a production once where it had to shut down for a minute while they got things up and running again. And I just was quickly going through. I didn't recall that being at any point since I remember being at a production and it happened in between then and now. So have there been some kind of short-term fixes that were done? My question is, I guess, is just since you're doing something in the auditorium, maybe just do it all like you are with Roger Ludlow, but I didn't know if perhaps there had been something to fix the audio issues at Ludlow High School.
So I can follow up with the principal there. When we met and discussed it, he never mentioned audio. He always was very excited about the lighting upgrade and improvements because of the problems that have gone going there. But as we work through both, there may be some opportunity to do some sound as well.
It looks like someone in the audience has her hand up through the chair to Mrs. Burns, who's walking towards the microphone.
You got it down? Thank you. We did replace an amplifier at Fairfield Ludlow, I think early last fall. That should have resolved any of the issues that were going on. I don't know if it's a complete repair for what you're talking about, but there was that system addressed. And I do believe it went well with the holiday concert. Thanks.
I want to
Could I
ask.
just follow up?
Go ahead.
I'm going to beat this horse because you know, and I talked to you about this, Mr. Papa George, having had a musical theater performer who was on the stage and going to a certain side, stage left, stage right, and all of a sudden you can't hear her sing. It does kind of mess up the performance a little bit. So I would just ask to get an update on that at the end of the year, and hopefully the play and the musical goes well. I think that we had spoken about it in either facilities or finance, and the price tag was rather high for the replacement of the sound system in the Ludlow Auditorium. But I think it's still important to have it be part of the conversation moving forward. So happy to hear that the amp is replaced. Good news. And Ms. Guernsey, I'm going to put you on this too because you have performers as well.
I wanted to ask Mr. Papa George, is there anything that we need to do with this budget in order to change how we're doing both the Ward and Ludlow gym floors going forward? Or is that going to be covered in here given the recent issue that we had?
We believe we can cover it in the budget as is because there will be savings from us purchasing and paying for services in-house. If we look at an outside vendor, we're still working on getting some pricing together on that, but we believe it will offset some additional from our in-house services.
Okay, and just going forward, do you think that's going to be a project maybe next year then to take them all the way down and get sanded and all of that? Obviously, it's not in this next year's budget, but is that something you think that we foresee we should be looking towards?
It's absolutely something we should be looking towards, and we are looking at getting pricing to see what it would cost to do and move forwards from there.
All right, thank you. Just want to make sure that that gets covered. What was I going to say? The balance, when you're talking about the expiring bids for the fire alarm, testing, grounds, refuse removal, is that, when you say expiring bids, do you mean like expiring contracts or that we need to go out to rebid again?
They have to go out to rebid.
And why does that, again?
We do 5-year bids with annual renewal every year on them, so they've hit the 5-year mark, so they have to go back out for rebid.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Maintenance? No? Okay. Dues and fees, 99 to 102. Nothing? Okay. That concludes going into the sections. We do have a few items as follow-ups and that I've collected, but just as Mrs. Maxon Kennelly had asked, the preferential process at this point is to send your questions in so that everyone can see them to staff. Go ahead.
I apologize. The MSTs are in the certified teacher line. You're correct. I looked in my book, and that's where they're.
The
they're
classroom teacher.
Classroom teacher. Yes.
All right, thank you. That's great. The next is discussion of superintendent recommended 2023-24 budget request and changes suggested by members. So normally what we do is we give everyone some time to share any thoughts that they might have regarding any changes they might be looking towards on Thursday. Doesn't mean you can't bring anything forward on Thursday, but if anyone has any things that they are interested in talking about on Thursday, now would be a time to share some of those things. Mrs. Vitale.
Just to repeat that I'm going to be just taking a look at things that are in the grant that might be creating cliff and seeing about moving them back into the operating budgets. But I will be reaching out to the superintendent just to get his thoughts on that, just to finalize that amendment to see if that's something that we can move forward. You know, following up on Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, not really an amendment, but just looking for some more information. There are a lot of changes being done in central office right now, and I appreciate that that is the superintendent's purview. And you know, the timing of Mr. Testani starting in November, it was a tough time to begin and make these changes right at the moment that Ms. Laborious and her staff were building the budget. So I think that some of the disconnect between the titles and the money in the budget is really just due to the timing of the work. But I shared the concerns about the reduction in math support for all of the reasons Mrs. Maxon Kennelly listed. I'm not necessarily looking to make a change, but I just wanted to put it out there. You know, when we take things away, very often it's hard to bring them back. And you know, we just passed our district improvement plan, and I want to make sure that our staff has the support they need to further instruction. Looking forward to hearing more about the DEI work that's been done for the last year. And I understand that we're getting, we might be hearing more about that in February. I think this work is important. You know, a lot of our district improvement plan is, you know, based on focusing on equity. Some of the numbers that we had today in terms of mental health needs of our students, the numbers at some of our more diverse schools are higher. I would like to know if there was any looking forward, not for Thursday, but I want this to stay on our radar. And as the budget moves forward over the next few months, and as we get more information, just a heads up in May that if we think that we need more in this area, might be looking to make adjustments later just to make sure that we have the support we need.
Mrs. Kelly?
Just real quick, I will be on Thursday looking to make an amendment to cut the pre-calc textbooks. I know that comes as a surprise to no one, but unless anyone has any strenuous objections to that, that is something I plan on doing.
Can I follow up to that? Is there any issue that you would foresee from something? I mean, we have pre-calculus books now, right? I mean, is there just, I just want to, sorry, Mrs. Kelly, I just want to understand what any potential impact is while we think about these things. Go ahead.
The pre-calc, we do have pre-calc textbooks now. The copyright date is older. These would be the new textbooks as part of the review last year that was presented, but essentially, yes, to answer your question, we do have pre-calc textbooks.
And textbooks is more of a one-time grant item too, though, right? Because I know we put textbooks in grants last year.
We did.
Okay. So, okay.
May I ask a quick follow-up to that? Because I believe I read somewhere in here that there's that it was the pre-calc allocated amount was for both the hardcover book as well as for something that was online. Is that the online version of the new textbook, or is that the online version of our existing book and it's a license we have to renew?
That is the online version that comes with the new textbook, which is
Thank you.
included there.
Sure, go ahead.
If we didn't purchase the pre-calc textbook, is there currently an online version that of our current pre-calc textbooks? And if we don't purchase new ones, does that expire? And is it going to cost us anything to renew if we need to?
Let me get an answer to that question. The licenses always expire at different times based on the company's price point. So let me see if they currently have them and if it would be.
Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Yeah, so I have 4 changes that I was interested in. One, as I've said from the start, I'm not interested in our funding a new position of a data coordinator. I think it's a trade-off. Either we've come up with a $200,000 new software program that is easier to use and thus our staff can use it, or we can stay with what we have and then maybe we need the data coordinator to facilitate getting access to something that staff is struggling getting access to. But to both get a, and it sounds like it is a far improved software program, and to get a staff member to help with it, I'm not in favor of that. So that's one. Secondly, I'm not sure how much I've spoken to it, but I do have an issue with 11 assistant principals. It's one thing when we're talking about a school that has 25 sections possibly next year and a school that has 10. And I don't think that is an appropriate budget allocation. There's great discrepancy in our school. I'm still am looking to hear more. That's going to be a question that I wanted to submit of just what exactly additional we are getting with this assistant principal, because it is certainly something we're going to add to Mrs. Gerber's point, so certainly something we're going to need to speak to other town bodies beyond the teacher evaluation piece. But I think our principals can handle the evaluation of those staff and then maintaining. I'm not looking to take the EPF away, but there's a big difference between a school with 10 sections and 25. And so I don't think 11 assistant principals are necessarily appropriate. Third, I would be looking for the information that with the attrition we've had in our tech department, I would be looking that becomes a budget reduction. Fourth, I am interested, because I am very concerned with the status of math. We've had such again, predating Mr. Testani, such upheaval with what is going on with math, and to have a new person providing all of that leadership to what's going on there. I, again, want to get the numbers exact, but whether it's down to a 0.6 or a 0.4 FTE so that our department chairs in the high schools can provide greater leadership within their buildings, that is something I would be looking as an add. And then that's what I have for now. And fifth, I do have a question, not fifth, question through the chair to Mrs. Vitale. When you're looking at the grant, because I do agree in terms of that creating cliffs, were you looking to have this be offsetting numbers, so moving something into the operating budget, but therefore with that money freed up, moving something into the grant, so it'd be cost neutral, if I can say that for now, but the point is not creating a cliff.
Not creating a cliff, taking something out of the grant that we know we're going to have to fund moving forward in the future, and potentially taking something out of the operating budget that is a one-time purchase covered by the grant, and then one and done.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Mrs. Rotelli?
Thanks. I just want to reiterate that I'll be looking for Mr. Mancusi. I'm very much interested in the info on the numbers we're seeing in our guidance centers for the general population of students and how we're accounting for that. Because the more I think about it, the more I know we're getting the data on our kids who have 504s and IEPs, but especially in our middle schools and high schools especially, those guidance centers are open to all students. And I don't know that we're adequately getting a picture of the need. And I want to make sure that we are being proactive about the mental health of our students. I know I keep saying it, and I don't think anybody needs reminding that we've had 2 suicides in 2 years. But I think we need to be very aware and really front load our support services for our students, given everything that we've heard. So I'll be looking over the numbers, but I don't know how fast you can pull that together, Mr. Mancusi, but I would really like to hear from our guidance centers.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Mrs. Rotelli? When you say see, I mean, kids might just spot by to like see their guidance counselor, like, hey, what's up? When you say see, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you really looking for him to assess? Like, they want to talk about something serious? They want to set up a counseling session?
My general awareness of the guidance centers, and now that I'm a parent of a high school student, it makes it that much more obvious to me. I get a lot of feedback. I'm very vocal about mental health. I get a lot of feedback from parents. I've already gotten feedback during this meeting about mental health, hearing from parents, hearing from professionals in town. So I know what type of support services there is available to kids who are identified. Kids that will have, 30 minutes twice a week or whatever it is. So I know what some of the caseloads will look like for those children and for those staff members. I am also well aware that our guidance centers can be filled on a day-to-day basis with kids who just need a break, who don't have a 504 and IEP, and aren't going to get one, and maybe whose parents don't know. But I do know that they spend time in the guidance center. They might be speaking with a social worker or a guidance counselor or the school psychologist or who's ever there. The secretaries and the guidance counselors are in the guidance centers are very popular as well. So I guess, and I'm looking for any type of information. If it can be anecdotal, but I do think that the staff in the guidance centers will be able to give us some color on what they're seeing, because I've already gotten feedback from parents during this meeting about not having adequate staff for the general population of our students, those that are not identified. So whatever clarity you can bring to that.
Sure, we will collect as much information as we can for Thursday to share with you. I just want, when you're looking over this data, the column 3 on this does refer to the number of DCF calls, the number of 911 calls, or the number of 211 calls for students in crisis who may need, further assessment because of suicidal ideation or they with safety planning. So the number by school is in that, and that does include not just special ed kids, but that includes all students within the building. But we can contact the guidance offices and get more information or see what we can collect for you by Thursday.
Mrs. Vitale.
And not for Thursday, but I think that just having this chart updated with, pre-COVID years just to see what the numbers were. I mean, we, without a doubt, the last few years have increased the mental health needs of our students, but we knew that it was there before. And I think it's important to have that as sort of a baseline.
Absolutely. And I just want to stress, as I did on last Tuesday, we understand the mental health crisis that we're dealing with in our schools with our students and our families. We understand the impact that 2 suicides have had on the town and on the district. That's why we have and we will continue to annually train all of our staff in suicide prevention so they can recognize the early signs of possible concerns and we can intervene appropriately to prevent another tragedy like that. And again, we've trained all our mental health staff in the past year plus in a district-wide risk assessment to measure the level of risk that students present, particularly regarding suicidal behavior. So, and that's something that we continually work with our psychs, our social workers, and our school counselors on, because we really, truly appreciate and understand the challenges that students face right now.
Sorry, do you have a follow-up?
Just a follow-up on that, and I don't want to go too off topic, but just while I have Mr. Mancusi here, Fairfield Cares, this was a topic of conversation last week, and not only the mental health needs of our children, but also of their parents and providing support. So again, I'm just going to follow up on the question I asked last week about just programming for parents as well. It's great that we're providing it for our staff, but anything that we can do to also help our parents, that would be appreciated. And if you think that there's a budget driver for that, be interested in hearing that for Thursday.
I've had a conversation at a previous board meeting with Rainey Noor from Fairfield Cares about joining together again as we did during COVID and doing some parent training sessions.
Ms. Guernsey?
I had just one
sorry,
quick follow-up. And I don't know if this is something you can put a data point on, but do we have any sense in the issue of mental health of how much of our increasing numbers is being driven by families being unable to access something outside of school?
As I stated at the last meeting, we had a conversation specifically on that, Dr. Parrish and I, with the team at Fairfield Woods on, the challenges that they are seeing in their families. And I don't think this is just a Fairfield Woods problem. It's just, or challenge. It just was brought up by the staff there that the demands put on them to meet the needs of students is greater because parents are not able to, access community resources just because they're booked up or there's no availability.
Thank you.
And one last thing on this. Just a reminder, just for anybody listening that might need support or services, that the Fairfield Public Schools website has a mental health page which has a wealth of information for parents to use. And I'm not sure everybody is aware of that, so just putting it out there that is a one-stop shopping for information.
Mrs. Guernsey.
So just a couple of things. There are a few areas that I've just been thinking about that I'm concerned that possibly could be underfunded in this budget. And one of them is in the area of DEI. I'm just really concerned about our students and staff getting the support we need with the elimination of this position. And I don't fully understand where it's captured in this budget that those jobs are going to be covered by our current staff. So that's a concern of mine. The additional mental health needs, which we've already talked about. And then to Mrs. Kelly's point, I'm also concerned about our fifth grade math students. So those are areas that I'm concerned about being underfunded. To Ms. Maxon Canelli's point regarding the data coordinator, that's one where I'm feeling like I'm not fully understanding the need for it. So those are just some of my thoughts to share. Thank you.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. Sure, it's Thursday, so if everyone could please, I know that so that staff has time, if you could please get questions in for anyone that has follow-ups tomorrow, lunchtime, afternoon, around there. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. If not tonight, if not right, the earlier the better. Not for you to answer them tonight, but to get them in, right? Because it's about the time to answer anything, right? Okay, so much appreciated. Thank you all very much for all of the work on these questions and follow-ups and getting this out to everyone. Much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Peterson, second by Mr. Asa. All in favor? Mr. Asa, are you voting? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good night.